Chapter 1. How Dogs Are Trained. Practical Frost stood by the wall, utterly motionless, utterly silent, barely visible in the deep shadows, a part of the building. The albino hadn't moved an inch in an hour or more, hadn't shifted his feet, hadn't blinked, hadn't breathed that Glokta had noticed, his eyes fixed on the street before them. Glokta himself cursed, shifted uncomfortably, winced, scratched his face, sucked at his empty gums. What's keeping them? A few minutes more and I might fall asleep, drop into that stinking canal and drown. How very apt that would be. He watched the oily, smelly water below him flap and ripple. Body found floating by the docks, bloated by seawater and far, far beyond recognition. Frost touched his arm in the darkness, pointed down the street with a big white finger. 3 men were moving slowly toward them, walking with the slightly bow-legged stance of men who spend a lot of time aboard ship, keeping their balance on a swaying deck. So that's one half of our little party. Better late than never. The 3 sailors came halfway across the bridge over the canal, then stopped and waited, no more than 20 strides away. Glokta could hear the tone of their conversation. Brash, confident, common accents. He shuffled slightly further into the shadows clinging to the building. Now footsteps came from the opposite direction, hurried footsteps. 2 more men appeared, walking quickly down the street. One, a very tall, thin fellow, in an expensive-looking fur coat, was glancing suspiciously around him. That must be Guffred Hornlack, senior mercer, our man. His companion had a sword at his hip, and was struggling with a big wooden trunk over one shoulder. Servant or bodyguard or both. He is of no interest. Glokta felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickling as they neared the bridge. Hornlack exchanged a few quick words with one of the sailors, a man with a big brown beard. "Ready?" he whispered to Frost. The practical nodded. "Hold!" shouted Glokta at the top of his voice. "In the name of His Majesty!" Hornlack's servant spun round, dropping the trunk onto the bridge with a bang, hand moving toward his sword. There was a soft twang from the shadows on the other side of the road. The servant looked surprised, gave a snort, then toppled onto his face. Practical Frost strode swiftly out of the shadows, feet padding on the road. Hornlack stared down, wide-eyed at the corpse of his bodyguard, then across at the hulking albino. He turned to the sailors. "Help me!" he cried. "Stop him!" Their leader smiled back. The mercer stumbled away, took a faltering step toward the shadows by the canal on the other side. Severard appeared from a doorway before him. Flatbow rested across his shoulder. Replace the bow with a bunch of flowers, and he'd look as if he was on his way to a wedding. You'd never think that he just killed a man. Surrounded, Hornlack could only look around dumbly, eyes wide with fear and surprise, as the 2 practicals approached, Glokta limping up behind them. "But I paid you," Hornlack shouted desperately at the sailors. "You paid me for a berth," said their captain. "Loyalty is extra." Practical Frost's big white hand slapped down on the merchant's shoulder, forced him onto his knees. Severard strolled over to the bodyguard, wedged the dirty toe of his boot under the body and rolled it over. The corpse stared up at the night sky, eyes glassy, the feathers of the flatbow bolt sticking out from his neck. The blood round his mouth looked black in the moonlight. "Dead," grunted Severard, most unnecessarily. "A bolt through the neck will do that," said Glokta. "Clean him up, would you?" "Right you are." Severard grabbed the bodyguard's feet and hauled them over the parapet of the bridge. Then he took him under the armpits and heaved the body straight over the side with a grunt. So smooth, so clean, so practiced. You can tell he's done it before. There was a splash as the corpse hit the slimy water below. Frost had Hornlack's hands tied firmly behind him now, and the bag on. The prisoner squawked through the canvas as he was dragged to his feet. Glokta himself shuffled over to the 3 sailors, his legs numb after all that time spent standing still in the alley. "And here we are," he said, pulling a heavy purse from his inside coat pocket. He held it swinging just above the captain's waiting palm. "Tell me, what happened tonight?" The old sailor smiled, weathered face crinkling up like boot leather. "My cargo was spoiling and we had to be away on the first tide," I told him that. "We waited and waited, half the night down by that stinking canal, but would you believe it? The bastard never showed. Very good. That's the story I'd tell in Westport, if anyone should ask." The captain looked hurt. "That's how it happened, Inquisitor. What other story could there be? Glokta let the purse drop and the money jingled inside. With the compliments of His Majesty, the captain weighed the purse in his hand. Always pleased to do His Majesty a favor. And he and his two companions turned, all yellow smiles, and made off toward the quay. "Right then," said Glokta. "Let's get on with it." "Where are my clothes?" shouted Hornlach, wriggling in his chair. "I do apologize for that. I know it's quite uncomfortable, but clothes can hide things. Leave a man his clothes, and you leave him pride and dignity, and all kinds of things it's better not to have in here. I never question a prisoner with their clothes on. Do you remember Salem Ruse?" "Who?" "Salem Ruse, one of your people. A mercer. We caught him dodging the king's taxes. He made a confession, named a few people. I wanted to talk to them, but they all died." The merchant's eyes flickered left and right, thinking about his options, trying to guess what we might know. "People die all the time." Glokta stared at the painted corpse of Juvens behind his prisoner, bleeding bright red paint all over the wall. "People die all the time. Of course, but not quite so violently. I have a notion that someone wanted them dead, that someone ordered them dead. I have a notion it was you. You've got no proof. No proof. You won't get away with this. Proof means nothing, Hornlach, but I'll indulge you. Ruse survived. He's just down the hall as it goes, no friends left, blubbering away, naming every mercer he can think of, or that we can think of, for that matter. Narrowed eyes, but no reply. We used him to catch Carpi." "Carpi?" asked the merchant, trying to look nonchalant. "Surely you remember your assassin. Slightly flabby Styrian, acne scars, swears a lot. We have him too. He told us the whole story. How you hired him, how much you paid him, what you asked him to do. The whole story." Glokta smiled. "He has an excellent memory for a killer, very detailed." The fear was showing now. Just a trace of it. But Hornlach rallied well. "This is an affront to my guild," he shouted, with as much authority as he could muster, naked and tied to a chair. "My master, Costa Dan Colt, will never allow this, and he's a close friend of Superior Kaline. Shit on Kaline! He's finished! Besides, Colt thinks you're tucked up safe aboard that ship, bound for Westport and far beyond our reach. I don't think you'll be missed for several weeks." The merchant's face had gone slack. A great deal could happen in that time. A very great deal. Hornlach's tongue darted over his lips. He glanced furtively up at Frost and Severard, leaned slightly forward. "So, now comes the bargaining. Inquisitor," he said in a wheedling tone. "If I've learned one thing from life, it's that every man wants something. Every man has his price, yes, and we have deep pockets. You have only to name it. Only name it. Only name it." "What do you want?" "What do I want?" asked Glokta, leaning into a more conspiratorial distance. "Yes. What's this all about? What do you want?" Hornlach was smiling now, a coy, clever little smile. "How quaint, but you won't buy your way out of this." Good. "I want my teeth back." The merchant's smile began to fade. "I want my leg back." Hornlach swallowed. "I want my life back." The prisoner had turned very pale. "No? Then perhaps I'll settle for your head on a stick. You've nothing else I want, no matter how deep your pockets are." Hornlach was trembling slightly now. "No more bluster? No more deals? Then we can begin." Glokta picked up the paper in front of him and read the first question. "What is your name? Look, Inquisitor, I—" Frost smashed the table with his fist and Hornlach cowered in his chair. "Answer his fucking question!" screamed Severard in his face. "Goffred Hornlach," squealed the merchant. Glokta nodded. "Good. You are a senior member of the Guild of Mercers." Yes. One of Magister Colt's deputies, in fact." "You know I am? Have you conspired with other mercers to defraud His Majesty the King? Did you hire an assassin to willfully murder 10 of His Majesty's subjects? Were you ordered so to do by Magister Coster Dan Colt, the head of the Guild of Mercers?" "No," shouted Hornlach, voice squeaky with panic. "That is not the answer we need." Glokta glanced up at Practical Frost. The big white fist sank into the merchant's gut, and he gave a gentle sigh and slid sideways. "My mother keeps dogs, you know," said Glokta. "Dogs," hissed Severard in the gasping merchant's ear as he shoved him back into the chair. "She loves them, trains them to do all manner of tricks." Glokta pursed his lips. Do you know how dogs are trained? Hornlack was still wounded, lolling in his chair with watering eyes, some way from being able to speak. Still at that stage of a fish pulled suddenly from the water, mouth opening and closing, but no sound. You must have that dog perform his tricks 100 times the same, and then you must do it all again. It's all about repetition, and if you want that dog to bark on cue, you mustn't be shy with the whip. You're going to bark for me, Hornlack, in front of the open council. You're mad, cried the mercer, staring around at them. You're all mad. Glokta flashed his empty smile. If you like, if it helps. He glanced back at the paper in his hand. What is your name? The prisoner swallowed. Goffred Hornlack. You are a senior member of the Guild of Mercers? Yes. One of Magister Cult's deputies, in fact. Yes. Have you conspired with other mercers to defraud His Majesty the King? Did you hire an assassin to willfully murder 10 of His Majesty's subjects? Were you ordered so to do by Magister Coster Dan Cult, the head of the Guild of Mercers? Hornlack cast desperately around him. Frost stared back. Severard stared back. Well? Demanded Glokta. The merchant closed his eyes. Yes, he whimpered. What's that? Yes, Glokta smiled. Excellent. Now tell me, what is your name? Chapter 2, Tea and Vengeance. It's a beautiful country, isn't it? Asked Bayaz, staring up at the rugged fells on either side of the road. Their horses' hooves thumped slowly along the track, the steady sound at odds with Logen's unease. Is it? Well, it's a hard country, of course, to those who don't know its ways. A tough country and unforgiving. But there's something noble there, too. The first of the Magi swept his arm across the view, breathed in the cold air with relish. It has honesty, integrity. The best steel doesn't always shine the brightest. He glanced over, swaying gently in his saddle. You should know that. I can't say I see the beauty of it, no? What do you see? Logen let his eyes wander over the steep, grassy slopes, spotted with patches of sedge and brown gorse, studded with outcrops of grey rock and stands of trees. I see good ground for a battle, provided you got here first. How so? Logen pointed at a knobbly hilltop. Archers on the bluff there couldn't be seen from the road, and you could hide most of your foot in these rocks. A few of the lightest armored left on the slopes, just to draw the enemy on up the steepest ground there. He pointed to the thorny bushes that covered the lower slopes. You'd let them come on a way, then when they were struggling through that gorse, you'd give them the arrows. Shafts falling on you from above like that, that's no fun at all. They come quicker and further, and they bite deeper. That'd break them up. By the time they got to the rocks, they'd be dog-tired and running short on discipline. That would be the time to charge. A bunch of carls, leaping out of those stones, charging down from above, fresh and keen and screaming like devils. That could break 'em right there. Logen narrowed his eyes at the hillside. He'd been on both sides of a surprise like that, and in neither case was the memory a pleasant one. But if they had a mind to hold, a few horsemen in those trees could finish it up. A few named men, a few hard fighters, bearing down on you from a place you never expected them. That's a terrifying thing. That'd make them run. But tired as they'd be, they wouldn't run too fast. That means prisoners, and prisoners might mean ransoms, or at least enemies cheaply killed. I see a slaughter, or a victory worth the singing, depending which side you're on. That's what I see, Bayaz smiled, head nodding with the slow movement of his horse. Was it Stolicus who said the ground must be a general's best friend, or it becomes his worst enemy? I never heard of him, but he was right enough. This is good ground for an army, providing you got here first. Getting there first is the trick. Indeed, we don't have an army, however. These trees could hide a few horsemen even better than a lot. Logen glanced sidelong at the wizard. He was slouched happily in the saddle, enjoying a pleasant ride in the country. I don't think Bethod will have appreciated your advice, and I had scores enough with him already. He got wounded where he feels it most, in his pride. He'll want vengeance, want it badly. Ah, yes, vengeance, that most widespread of northern pastimes. Its popularity never seems to wane. Logen stared grimly around at the trees, the rocks, the folds and the valley's sides, the many hiding places. There'll be men out in these hills, looking for us. Small bands of skilled and battle-hardened men, well-mounted and well-armed, familiar with the land. Now Bethod has finished all his enemies. There's nowhere in the north out of his reach. They might be waiting there. He pointed off towards some rocks by the road, or in those trees, or those. Malachus Kwai, riding up ahead with the pack-horse, glanced nervously around. They could be anywhere. Does that frighten you? Asked Bayaz. Everything frightens me, and it's well that it does. Fear is a good friend to the hunted. It's kept me alive this long. The dead are fearless, and I don't care to join them. He'll send men to the library, too. Oh yes, to burn my books and so on. Does that frighten you? Not much. The stones by the gate have the word of Juvens on them, and that is not to be denied, even now. No one with violence in mind can come near. I imagine Bethud's men will wander around the lake in the rain until they run out of food, all the while thinking how very strange it is that they cannot find so large a thing as a library. No, said the wizard happily, scratching at his beard. I would concentrate on our own predicament. What happens, do you think, if we're caught? Bethod will kill us, and in the most unpleasant manner he can think of, unless he has it in mind to be merciful, and let us off with a warning. That doesn't seem likely. I've been thinking the same thing. Our best chance is to make for the White Flow. Try to get across the river into England, and trust to luck we aren't seen. Logen didn't like trusting to luck. The very word left a sour taste. He peered up at the cloudy sky. We could do with some bad weather. A healthy downpour could hide us nicely. The skies had been pissing on him for weeks, but now that he needed rain, they refused to produce a drop. Malachus Quay was looking over his shoulder at them, his eyes big and round with worry. Shouldn't we try to move faster? Perhaps, said Logen, patting the neck of his horse. But that would tire the horses, and we may need all the speed we can get later. We could hide in the day and travel by night, but then we risk getting lost. We're better as we are. Move slowly and hope we aren't seen. He frowned at the hilltop. Hope we haven't been seen already, said Bayaz. Then this might be the best time to tell you. That witch Korab isn't half the fool I pretended she was. Logen felt a sinking sensation. No? For all her paint and golden chat about the utmost north, she knows what she is about. The long eye, they call it. An old trick, but effective. She has been watching us. She knows where we are. She knows when we left, more than likely. And in what direction we were heading. That does nothing for our chances. I should say not. Shit. Logen caught some movement in the trees to their left, and he snatched hold of the hilt of his sword. A couple of birds took to the skies. He waited, heart in his mouth. Nothing. He let his hand drop back. We should have killed them while we had the chance. All three of them. But we didn't, and there it is. Bayaz looked over at Logen. If they do catch us, what's your plan? Run? And hope our horses are the faster? And this one? Asked Bayaz. The wind blew keenly through the hollow in spite of the trees, making the flames of the campfire flicker and dance. Malachus Quay hunched his shoulders and drew his blanket tight around them. He peered at the short stem that Bayaz was holding up to him, forehead crinkled with concentration. This was the fifth plant, and the miserable apprentice had yet to get one of them right. Is that, Ilith, echoed the wizard, his face giving no clue as to whether it was the right answer. He was merciless as Bethod where his apprentice was concerned. Perhaps, hardly. The apprentice closed his eyes and sighed for the fifth time that evening. Logen felt for him. He really did, but there was nothing to be done. Urzulum, in the old tongue, the round-leafed kind. Yes, of course, Urzulum. It was at the end of my tongue the whole time. If the name was at the end of your tongue, then the uses of the plant cannot be far behind, eh? The apprentice narrowed his eyes and looked hopefully up towards the night sky, as though the answer might be written in the stars. Is it for aches in the joints? No, it is decidedly not. I am afraid your aching joints will still be troubling you. Bayaz turned the stem slowly round in his fingers. Urzulum has no uses, not that I know of. It's just a plant, and he tossed it away into the bushes. Just a plant, echoed Quay, shaking his head. Logen sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. I'm sorry, Master Ninefingers, are we boring you? What does it matter? Asked Logen, throwing his hands up in the air. Who cares about the name of a plant with no use? Bayaz smiled. A fair point. Tell us, Malachus, what does it matter? If a man seeks to change the world, he should first understand it. The apprentice trotted the words out as if by rote, evidently relieved to be asked a question he knew the answer to. The smith must learn the ways of metals, the carpenter the ways of wood, or their work will be of but little worth. Base magic is wild and dangerous, for it comes from the other side, and to draw from the world below is fraught with peril. The magus tempers magic with knowledge and thus produces high art, but like the smith or the carpenter, he should only seek to change that which he understands. With each thing he learns, his power is increased. So must the magus strive to learn all, to understand the world entire. The tree is only as strong as its root, and knowledge is the root of power. Don't tell me, Juven's Principles of Art. The very first lines, said Bayaz. Forgive me for saying so, but I've been on this world for more than 30 years, and I've yet to understand a single thing that's happened. To know the world completely, to understand everything, that's quite a task. The magus chuckled. An impossible one, to be sure. To truly know and understand even a blade of grass is the study of a lifetime, and the world is ever changing. That is why we tend to specialize. So what did you choose? Fire, said Bayaz, gazing happily into the flames, the light dancing on his bald head. Fire, and force, and will. But even in my chosen fields, after countless long years of study, I remain a novice. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. Still, the struggle itself is worthwhile. Knowledge is the root of power, after all. So with enough knowledge, you magi can do anything, Bayaz frowned. There are limits, and there are rules, like the first law. Master and apprentice glanced up at Logen as one. It's forbidden to speak with devils, am I right? It was plain that Quai didn't remember his fevered outburst. His mouth was open with surprise. Bayaz's eyes only narrowed a little, with the faintest trace of suspicion. Why, yes you are, said the first of the magi. It is forbidden to touch the other side direct. The first law must apply to all, without exception, as must the second, which is, it is forbidden to eat the flesh of men. Logen raised an eyebrow. You wizards get up to some strange stuff. Bayaz smiled. Oh, you don't know the half of it. He turned to his apprentice, holding up a lumpy brown root. And now, Master Quai, would you be good enough to tell me the name of this? Logen couldn't help grinning to himself. He knew this one. Come, Master Quai, we don't have all night. Logen wasn't able to stand the apprentice's misery any longer. He leaned toward him, pretending to poke at the fire with a stick, coughed to conceal his words, and whispered, "Crow's foot," under his breath. Bayaz was a good distance away, and the wind was still rustling in the trees. There was no way the magus could have heard him. Quai played his part well. He continued to peer at the root, brow knitted in thought. Is it crow's foot? He ventured. Bayaz raised an eyebrow. Why, yes, it is. Well done, Malachus. And can you tell me its uses? Logen coughed again. Wounds, he whispered, looking carelessly off into the bushes, one hand shielding his mouth. He might not know too much about plants, but on the subject of wounds he had a wealth of experience. I believe it's good for wounds, said Quai slowly. Excellent, Master Quai. Crow's foot is correct, and it is good for wounds. I am glad to see we are making some progress after all. He cleared his throat. It does seem curious that you should use that name, however. They only call this crow's foot north of the mountains. I certainly never taught you that name. I wonder who it is you know, from that part of the world. He glanced over at Logen. Have you ever considered a career in the magical arts, Master Ninefingers? He narrowed his eyes at Quai once more. I may have space for an apprentice. Malachus hung his head. Sorry, Master Bayaz. You are indeed. Perhaps you could clean the pots for us. That task may be better suited to your talents. Quai reluctantly shrugged off his blanket, collected the dirty bowls, and shuffled off through the brush towards the stream. Bayaz bent over the pot on the fire, adding some dried-up leaves to the bubbling water. The flickering light of the flames caught the underside of his face. The steam curled around his bald head. All in all, he looked quite the part. What is that? Asked Logen, reaching for his pipe. Some spell? Some potion? Some great work of high art? Tea, eh? Leaves of a certain plant, boiled up in water? It is considered quite a luxury in Gurkul. He poured some of the brew out into a cup. Would you like to try it? Logen sniffed at it suspiciously. Smells like feet. Suit yourself. Bayaz shook his head and sat back down beside the fire, wrapping both hands around the steaming cup. But you're missing out on one of nature's greatest gifts to man. He took a sip and smacked his lips in satisfaction. Calming to the mind, invigorating to the body. There are few ills a good cup of tea won't help with. Logen pressed a lump of chaga into the bowl of his pipe. How about an axe in the head? That's one of them, admitted Bayaz with a grin. Tell me, Master Ninefingers, why all the blood between you and Bethad? Did you not fight for him many times? Why do you hate each other so? Logen paused as he was sucking smoke from the pipe, let his breath out. There are reasons, he said stiffly. The wounds of that time were still raw. He didn't like anyone picking at them. Ah, reasons. Bayaz looked down at his teacup. And what of your reasons? Does this feud not cut both ways? Perhaps, but you are willing to wait. Oh, I have to be. You are very patient, for a Northman. Logen thought of Bethad, and his loathsome sons, and the many good men died killed for their ambitions. The men Hend killed for their ambitions. He thought of the Shanka, and his family, and the ruins of the village by the sea. He thought of all his dead friends. He sucked at his teeth, and stared at the fire. I've settled a few scores in my time, but it only led to more. Vengeance can feel fine, but it's a luxury. It doesn't fill your belly, or keep the rain off. To fight my enemies, I need friends behind me, and I'm clean out of friends. You have to be realistic. It's been a while since my ambitions went beyond getting through each day alive. Bayaz laughed, his eyes glittering in the firelight. What? Asked Logen, handing the pipe across to him. No offense, but you are an endless source of surprises. Not at all what I was expecting. You are quite the riddle, May. Oh yes. The bloody nine, he whispered, opening his eyes up wide. That's one bastard of a reputation you're carrying, my friend. The stories they tell. One bastard of a name. Why mothers scare their children with it? Logen said nothing. There was no denying it. Bayaz sucked slowly on the pipe, then blew out a long plume of smoke. I've been thinking about the day that Prince Calder paid us a visit. Logen snorted. I try not to spare him too much thought. Nor I. But it wasn't his behavior that interested me. It was yours. It was? I don't remember doing a thing. Bayaz pointed the stem of the pipe at Logen from across the fire. But that is my point exactly. I have known many fighting men, soldiers and generals and champions and whatnot. A great fighter must act quickly, decisively, whether with his own arm or with an army. For he who strikes first often strikes last. So fighters come to rely on their baser instincts, to answer always with violence, to become proud and brutal. Bayaz passed the pipe back to Logen. But, whatever the stories, you are not such a one. I know plenty who disagree. Perhaps, but the fact remains, Calder slighted you, and you did nothing. So you know when you should act, and act quickly. But you also know when not to. That shows restraint and a calculating mind. Perhaps I was just afraid? Of him? Come now, you didn't seem afraid of Scale, and he's a deal more worrying. And you walked 40 miles with my apprentice over your back. And that shows courage and compassion too. A rare combination indeed. Violence and restraint, calculation and compassion, and you speak to the spirits too. Logen raised an eyebrow. Not often, and only when there's no one else around. Their talk is dull and not half so flattering as yours. That's true. The spirits have little to say to men, I understand, though I have never spoken with them. I have not the gift. Few have these days. He took another swallow from his cup, peering at Logen over the rim. I can scarcely think of another one alive. Malachus stumbled from the trees, shivering, and set the wet bowls down. He grabbed his blanket, wrapped it tightly around him, then peered hopefully at the steaming pot on the fire. Is that tea? Bayaz ignored him. Tell me, Master Ninefingers, in all the time since you arrived at my library, you have never once asked me why I sent for you. Why now we are wandering through the north in peril of our lives. That strikes me as odd. Not really. I don't want to know. Don't want to. All my life I've sought to know things. What's on the other side of the mountains? What's on the other side of the mountains? What are my enemies thinking? What weapons will they use against me? What friends can I trust? Logen shrugged. Knowledge may be the root of power, but each new thing I've learned has left me worse off. He sucked again on the pipe, but it was finished. He tapped the ashes out onto the ground. Whatever it is you want from me, I will try to do, but I don't want to know until it's time. I'm sick of making my own decisions. They're never the right ones. Ignorance is the sweetest medicine, my father used to say. I don't want to know. Baez stared at him. It was the first time Logen had seen the first of the Magi look at all surprised. Malachus Quay cleared his throat. I'd like to know, he said in a small voice, looking hopefully up at his master. Yes, murmured Baez. But you don't get to ask. It was around midday that it all went wrong. Logen was just starting to think that they might make it to the White Flow. Maybe even live out the week. It felt as if he lost his concentration for just a moment. Unfortunately, it was the one moment that mattered. Still, it was well done. You had to give them that. They'd chosen their spot carefully and tied rags around their horses' hooves to muffle the sound. 3 trees might have seen it coming if he'd been with them, but he had an eye for the ground like no other. The dogmen might have smelled them if he'd been there, but he had the nose for it. The fact was, neither of them were there. The dead are no help at all. There were 3 horsemen, waiting for them as they rounded a blind corner. Well armed and armored, dirty faces but clean weapons, veterans each man. The one on the right was thick-set and powerful-looking, with almost no neck. The one on the left was tall and gaunt, with small hard eyes. Both of them had round helmets, coats of weathered mail, and long spears lowered and ready. Their leader sat on his horse like a bag of turnips, slouched in the saddle with the ease of the expert horseman. He nodded to Logen. "Ninefingers, the Bryn, the bloody 9. It's right good to see you again." "Black Toe," muttered Logen, forcing a friendly smile onto his face. "It warmed my heart to see you too, if things were different, but they are as they are." The old warrior's eyes moved slowly over Baez, Quay, and Logen as he spoke, taking in their weapons, or the lack of them, working out his game. A stupider opponent could have evened up the odds, but Black Toe was a named man, and no fool. His eyes came to rest on Logen's hand as it crept slowly across his body towards the hilt of his sword, and he shook his head slowly. "None of your tricks, bloody 9. You can see we've got you." And he nodded over at the trees behind them. Logen's heart sank even lower. 2 more riders had appeared and were trotting forwards to complete the trap, their muffled hooves barely making a sound on the soft ground by the road. Logen chewed his lip. Black Toe was right, damn him. The 4 horsemen closed in, lowered spear points swaying, faces cold, minds set to the task. Malachus Quay stared at them with frightened eyes, his horse shying back. Baez smiled pleasantly as though they were his oldest friends. Logen would have liked a touch of the wizard's composure. His own heart was hammering, his mouth was sour. Black Toe nudged his horse forward, one hand gripping the shaft of his axe, the other resting on his knee, not even using the reins. He was a masterful horseman, famous for it. That's what happens when a man loses all his toes to the frost. Riding is quicker than walking, that has to be admitted. But when it came to fighting, Logen preferred to keep his feet firmly on the ground. "Better be coming with us now," said the old warrior. "Better all round." Logen could hardly agree, but the odds were stacked high against him. A sword may have a voice, as Baez had said, but a spear is a damn good thing for poking a man off a horse, and there were 4 of them closing in around him. He was caught outnumbered, off guard, and with the wrong tools for the task. Yet again, best to play for time and hope some chance might show itself. Logen cleared his throat, doing his best to take the fear out of his voice. "Never thought you'd make your peace with Bethod, Black Toe, not you." The old warrior scratched at his long, matted beard. "I was one of the last, truth be told. But I knelt in the end, same as all the rest. Can't say I liked it any. But there it is. Best let me have the blade, Ninefingers. What about old man Jezal? You telling me he bows to Bethod, or did you just find a master to suit you better?" Blacktoe didn't get upset by the jibe, not in the least. He just looked sad and tired. Bethod doesn't suit me much at all as a master, and nor do his sons. No man likes licking Scales' fat arse or Calder's skinny one, you should know that. Now give up the sword, the day is wasting and we've ground to cover. We can talk just as well with you unarmed. Y'all's dead. Eh, said Blacktoe suspiciously. He offered Bethod a duel. Didn't you hear the feared done for him? Feared? Where have you been? Under a mountain? More or less. What's this feared? I don't know what he is. Blacktoe leaned from his saddle and spat in the grass. I heard he's not a man at all. They say that bitch Korib dug him out from under a hill. Who knows? Leastways, he's Bethod's new champion, and far nastier even than the last. No offense. None at all, said Logen. The man with no neck had moved in close. A little too close, perhaps. The point of his spear was hovering only a foot or two away. Close enough for Logen to grab a hold of. Maybe. Old man Yawl was a strong hand. Aye, that's why we followed him. But it done him no good. This feared broke him. Broke him bad, like he was no more'n a dog. Left him alive, if you could call it that, so we could learn from his mistake. But he didn't live long. Most of us knelt right then. Those with wives and sons to think on. No sense in putting it off. There's a few of them still, up in the mountains, who won't bow to Bethod, that moon-worshipping madman Crummocky Fail and his hillmen and a few beside, but not many. And those there are, Bethod's got plans for. Blacktoe held out a big calloused hand. Better let me have the blade. Bloody 9. Left hand only, if you please. Slow as slow and none of your tricks. Better all round. So that was it. Out of time. Logen wrapped the 3 fingers of his left hand round the hilt of his sword, the cold metal pressing into his palm. The big man's spear point edged a little closer. The tall one had relaxed a little, confident they had him. His spear was pointing up into the air, unready. There was no telling what the 2 behind were doing. The desire to glance over his shoulder was almost irresistible, but Logen forced himself to look ahead. I always had respect for you, Ninefingers, even though we stood on different sides. I've no feud with you, but Bethod wants vengeance. He's drunk on it, and I swore to serve. Blacktoe looked him sadly in the eye. I'm sorry it's me, for what it's worth. Likewise, muttered Logen. I'm sorry it's you. He slid the sword slowly from the scabbard. For what it's worth, and he snapped his arm out, smashing the sword's pommel into Blacktoe's mouth. The old warrior gave a squawk as the dull metal crunched into his teeth and tumbled backwards out of the saddle, his axe flying from his hand and clattering into the road. Logen grabbed hold of the shaft of the big man's spear, just below the blade. Go! He bellowed at Quai, but the apprentice only stared back, blinking. The man with no neck pulled hard at the spear, nearly jerking Logen out of the saddle. But he kept his grip. He reared up in the stirrups, raising the sword high above his head. Necklace took one hand from his spear, his eyes going wide, and held it up on an instinct. Logen swung the sword down with all his strength. He was shocked by the sharpness of it. It took the big man's arm off just below the elbow, then struck into his shoulder, cleaving through the fur and the mail beneath and splitting him to his stomach, near in half. Blood showered across the road, spattering in the face of Logen's horse. It was trained for riding but not for war, and it reared and span around, kicking and plunging in a panic. It was the best Logen could do to stay on top of the damn thing. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Bayaz smack Quai's horse on the rump, and it sped off with the apprentice bouncing in the saddle, the pack horse galloping along behind. Then everything was a mess of plunging and snorting beasts, clashing and scraping metal, curses and cries. Battle. A familiar place, but no less terrifying for that. Logen clung to the reins with his right hand as his horse bucked and thrashed, swinging the sword wildly round his head, more to scare his enemies than hurt them. Every moment he expected the jolt and searing pain as he was stuck through with a spear, then the ground to rush up and smack him in the face. He saw Quay and Bayaz galloping away down the road, hotly pursued by the tall man, his spear couched under his arm. He saw Blacktoe rolling to his feet, spitting blood, scrambling for his axe. He saw the 2 men who'd come from behind fighting for control of their own twisting horses, spears waving in their hands. He saw the body of the one he'd just killed loll in half and topple slowly out of the saddle, blood pouring out over the muddy ground. Logen squawked as he felt a spear point dig into the back of his shoulder, and he was shoved forward, almost over his horse's head. Then he realized he was facing down the road, and still alive. He dug his heels into the flanks of his horse, and it sped away, sending mud flying from its hooves and into the faces of the men behind. He fumbled the sword across into his right hand, nearly dropping the reins and falling into the road. He shrugged his shoulder, but the wound didn't feel too bad. He could still move the arm all right. I'm still alive. Still alive. The road flashed by beneath him, the wind stinging his eyes. He was making ground on the tall man. The rags on his horse's hooves were slowing him down now, slipping on the muddy ground. Logen gripped the hilt of the sword as hard as he could, raised it behind him. The head of his enemy snapped round, but too late. There was a hollow bonk of metal on metal as swords smashed into helmet, leaving a deep dent and sending the tall man sprawling. His head bounced once against the road, foot still caught in one stirrup. Then he came free and tumbled over and over on the grass, arms and legs flopping. His riderless horse galloped on, eyes rolling at Logen as he passed. Still alive. Logen looked over his shoulder. Blacktoe was back in the saddle and galloping after him, axe raised above his head, tangled hair flying out behind. The two other spearmen were with him, urging their horses forwards, but there was still some distance between them. Logen laughed. Perhaps he'd make it after all. He waved his sword at Blacktoe as the road entered a wood in the valley's bottom. I'm still alive, he screamed at the top of his voice, and then his horse pulled up so suddenly that Logen was almost flung over its head. It was only by throwing one arm round its neck that he kept his seat at all. As soon as he fell back into the saddle, he saw the problem, and it was a bad one. Several tree trunks had been hauled across the road, their branches chopped off and the stumps filed down to vicious points, sticking out in all directions. Two more mailed carls stood in front, spears at the ready. Even the best of horsemen couldn't have jumped that barrier, and Logen wasn't the best of horsemen. Bayaz and his apprentice had reached the same decision. Both sat still on their horses before the barricade, the old man looking puzzled, the young one simply scared. Logen fingered the grip of his sword and cast desperately around, peering into the trees for some way out. He saw more men now, archers. One, then two, then three of them, creeping slowly forward on both sides of the road, arrows nocked and strings drawn back. Logen turned round in the saddle, but Blacktoe and his two companions were trotting up. There was no escape that way. They reined in a few strides away, well out of reach of Logen's sword. His shoulders slumped. The chase was done. Blacktoe leaned over and spat some blood onto the ground. All right, bloody nine, that's as far as you go. Funny thing, muttered Logen, looking down at the long gray blade of the sword, dashed and spattered with red. All that time I fought for Bethad against you, and now you fight for him against me. Seems we're never on the same side, and he's the only winner. Funny thing. Aye, mumbled Blacktoe through his bloody lips. Funny. But no one was laughing. Blacktoe and his carls had faces hard as death. Huey looked on the verge of tears. Only Bayaz, for reasons beyond understanding, still had his customary good humor. All right, Ninefingers, get off the horse. Bethad wants you alive, but he'll take you dead if he has to. Down. Now. Logen's thoughts began to turn to how they might escape once he'd given up. Blacktoe wasn't like to make a mistake once he had them. Logen would likely be kicked half to death for the fight he'd given them already, if they didn't take his kneecaps off. They'd be trussed up tight like chickens for the slaughter. He pictured himself flung down on the stones with half a mile of chain around him. Bethad smiling down from his throne, Calder and Scale laughing, probably poking at him with something sharp. Logen looked around. He looked at the cold arrowheads and the cold spear points, and the cold eyes of the men pointing them. There was no way out of this little spot. All right, you win. Logen threw his sword down, point first. He had it in mind that it would bite into the soil and stand there, swaying back and forth, but it toppled over and clattered against the dirt. It was that sort of day. He slowly swung one leg over the saddle and slid down into the road. That's better. Now the rest of you. Quay instantly slithered off his horse and stood there, glancing nervously up at Bayaz, but the Magus made no move. Blacktoe frowned and hefted his axe. You too, old man. I prefer to ride. Logen winced. That was not the right answer. Any moment now Glokta would give the order. The bowstrings would sing, and the first of the magi would drop into the road, stuck full of arrows, probably still with that infuriating smile on his dead face. But the order never came. There was no word of command, no strange incantation, no arcane gestures. The air around Bayaz's shoulders seemed to shimmer, like the air above the land on a hot day, and Logen felt a strange tugging at his guts. Then the trees exploded in a wall of searing, blinding, white-hot flame. Trunks burst and branches snapped with deafening cracks, venting plumes of brilliant fire and scalding steam. One burning arrow shot high up into the air over Logen's head, and then the archers were gone, boiled away into the furnace. Logen choked and gasped, reeled back in shock and terror, arm up to ward his face from the blistering heat. The barricade was sending up great gouts of fire and blinding sparks. The two men who had been standing near were rolling and thrashing, wreathed in hungry flames, their screams lost in the deafening roar. The horses plunged and reeled, snorting with mad fear. Glokta was flung to the ground for the second time, his flaming axe flying from his hands, and his horse stumbled and fell, crashing down on top of him. One of his companions was even less lucky, thrown straight into the sheets of fire by the road, his despairing cry quickly cut off. Only one stayed upright, and he was lucky enough to be wearing gloves. By some miracle he kept hold of the burning shaft of his spear. How he had the presence of mind to charge with the world on fire around him, Logen would never know. Strange things can happen in a fight. He chose Quay as his target, bearing down on him with a snarl, the flaming spear aimed at his chest. The witless apprentice stood there helpless, rooted to the spot. Logen barreled into him, snatching up his sword, sending Quay rolling across the road with his hands over his head. Then he chopped mindlessly at the horse's legs as it flashed past him. The blade was torn from his fingers and went skittering away. Then a hoof slammed into Logen's injured shoulder and clubbed him into the dirt. The breath was knocked from him and the burning world span crazily around. His blow had its effect, though. A few strides further down the road, the horse's hacked front legs gave way, and it stumbled, carried helplessly forward, tumbled and pitched into the flames, horse and rider vanishing together. Logen cast about on the ground for the sword. Sizzling leaves whipped across the road, stinging his face and his hands. The heat was a great weight pressing down on him, pulling the sweat out of his skin. He found a bloody grip of the sword, seized hold of it with his torn fingers. He lurched up, staggered round, shouting meaningless sounds of fury, but there was no one left to fight. The flames were gone, as suddenly as they'd arrived, leaving Logen coughing and blinking in the curling smoke. The silence seemed complete after the roaring noise. The gentle breeze felt icy cold. A wide circle of the trees around them had been reduced to charred and shattered stumps, as though they had burned for hours. The barricade was a sagging heap of gray ash and black splinters. Two corpses lay sprawled nearby, barely recognizable as men, burned down to the bones. The blackened blades of their spears lay in the road. The shafts vanished. Of the archers there was no sign at all. They were soot blown away on the wind. Quay lay motionless on his face, with his hands over his head, and beyond him, Glokta's horse lay sprawled out on its side, one leg silently twitching, the other still. "Well," said Bayaz, the muffled noise making Logen jump. He'd somehow expected there would never be another sound again. "That's that." The first of the magi swung a leg over his saddle and slid down into the road. His horse stood there, calm and obedient. It hadn't moved the whole time. "There now, Master Quay. Do you see what can be achieved with a proper understanding of plants?" Bayaz sounded calm, but his hands were trembling badly. He looked haggard, ill, old, like a man who'd dragged a cart 10 miles. Logen stared at him, swaying silently back and forth, the sword dangling from his hand. "So that's art, is it?" His voice sounded very small and far away. Bayaz wiped the sweat from his face. "Of a sort, hardly very subtle, still." And he poked at one of the charred bodies with his boot. Subtlety is wasted on the Northmen. He grimaced, rubbed at his sunken eyes and peered up the road. "Where the hell did those horses get to?" Logen heard a ragged groan from the direction of Blacktoe's fallen mount. He stumbled towards it, tripped and fell to his knees, stumbled towards it again. His shoulder was a ball of pain, his left arm numb, his fingers ripped and bleeding. But Blacktoe was in worse shape. Much worse. He was propped up on his elbows, legs crushed under his horse right to the hips, hands burned to swollen tatters. He had a look of profound puzzlement on his bloody face as he tried, unsuccessfully, to drag himself from under the horse. "You fucking killed me," he whispered, staring open-mouthed at the wreckage of his hands. "All done. I'll never make it back, and even if I could, what for?" He gave a despairing laugh. "Bethod ain't half so merciful as he used to be. Better you kill me now before it starts to hurt. Better all round." And he slumped back and lay in the road. Logen looked up at Bayaz, but there was no help there. "I'm not much at healing," snapped the wizard, glancing round at the circle of blasted stumps. "I told you we tend to specialize." He closed his eyes and bent over, hands resting on his knees, breathing hard. Logen thought of the floor in Bethod's hall, and the two princes laughing and poking. "All right," he muttered, standing up and hefting the sword. "All right." Blacktoe smiled. "You were right, Ninefingers. I never should have knelt to Bethod. Never. Shit on him and his feared. It would have been better to die up in the mountains, fighting him to the last. There might have been something fine in that. I just had enough. You can see that, can't you?" "I can see that," muttered Logen. "I had enough myself." "Something fine," said Blacktoe, staring far up into the gray skies. "I just had enough. So I reckon I earned this. Fair is fair." He lifted his chin. "Well then, get it done, lad." Logen raised the sword. "I'm glad it's you, Ninefingers," hissed Blacktoe through gritted teeth. "For what it's worth, I'm not." Logen swung the blade down. The scorched stumps were still smoldering, smoke curling up into the air, but all was cold now. Logen's mouth tasted salty, like blood. Perhaps he bit his tongue somewhere. Perhaps it was someone else. He threw the sword down, and it bounced and clattered, shedding red specks across the dirt. Quay gaped around for a moment, then he folded up and coughed puke into the road. Logen stared down at Blacktoe's headless corpse. That was a good man. Better than me. History is littered with dead good men. Bayaz knelt stiffly and picked up the sword, wiped the blade on Blacktoe's coat, then he squinted up the road, peering through the haze of smoke. We should be moving. Others might be on their way. Logen looked at his bloody hands, slowly turning them over and over. They were his hands, no doubt. There was the missing finger. Nothing's changed, he mumbled to himself. Bayaz straightened up, brushing the dirt from his knees. "When has it ever?" He held out the sword out to Logen, hilt first. "I think you'll still be needing this." Logen stared at the blade for a moment. It was clean, dull gray, just as it had always been. Unlike him, it showed not so much as a scratch from the hard use it had seen that day. He didn't want it back. Not ever, but he took it anyway. Chapter 3. What Freedom Looks Like. The point of the shovel bit into the ground with the sharp scrape of metal on earth, an all-too-familiar sound. It didn't bite in far, for all the effort put behind it, as the soil was rocky hard and baked by the sun. But she wasn't to be deterred by a little hard soil. She had dug too many holes, and in ground worse for digging than this. When the fighting is over, you dig, if you're still alive. You dig graves for your dead comrades. A last mark of respect, however little you might have had for them. You dig as deep as you can be bothered. You dump them in, you cover them up. They rot away, and are forgotten. That's the way it's always been. She flicked her shoulder, and sent a shovelful of sandy soil flying. Her eyes followed the grains of dirt and little stones as they broke apart in the air, then fell across the face of one of the soldiers. One eye stared at her reproachfully. The other had one of her arrows snapped off in it. A couple of flies were buzzing lazily around his face. There would be no burial for him. The graves were for her people. He and his bastard friends could lie out in the merciless sun. After all, the vultures have to eat. The blade of the shovel swished through the air and bit again into the soil. Another clump of dirt tumbled away. She straightened up and wiped the sweat from her face. She squinted up at the sky. The sun was blazing, straight above, sucking whatever moisture remained out of the dusty landscape, drying the blood on the rocks. She looked at the two graves beside her. One more to go. She would finish this one, Throw the earth on top of those 3 fools, rest for a moment, then away. Others would be coming for her soon enough. She stuck the shovel into the earth, took hold of the water skin and pulled the stopper out. She took a few lukewarm swallows, even allowed herself the luxury of pouring a trickle out into her grimy hand and splashing it on her face. The early deaths of her comrades had at least put a stop to the endless squabbling over water. There would be plenty to go round now. Water, gasped the soldier by the rocks. It was surprising, but he was still alive. Her arrow had missed his heart, but it had killed him still just a little less quickly than she had intended. He had managed to drag himself as far as the rocks, but his crawling days were over. The stones around him were coated in dark blood. The heat and that arrow would do for him soon, however tough he was. She wasn't thirsty, but there was water to spare and she wouldn't be able to carry it all. She took a few more swallows, letting it slosh out of her mouth and down her neck. A rare treat out here in the Badlands, to let water fall. Shining drops spattered onto the dry earth, turning it dark. She splashed some more on her face, licked her lips, and looked over at the soldier. "Mercy," he croaked, one hand clasped to his chest where the arrow was sticking out of it, the other stretched weakly towards her. "Mercy, ha!" She pushed the stopper back into the skin, then tossed it down next to the grave. "Don't you know who I am?" She grabbed hold of the handle of the shovel. The point of its blade bit once more into the earth. "Pharaoh Maljean," came a voice from somewhere behind her. "I know who you are. A most unwelcome development." She swung the shovel again, mind racing. Her bow was lying just out of reach on the ground by the first grave she had dug. She threw some dirt away, her sweating shoulders prickling at the unseen presence. She glanced over at the dying soldier. He was staring at a point behind her, and that gave her a good idea where this new arrival was standing. She dug the point of the shovel in again, then let go and sprang forward out of the hole, rolling across the dirt, snatching up her bow as she moved, notching an arrow, drawing back the string in one smooth motion. An old man was standing about 10 strides away. He was making no move forward, was holding no weapon. He was just standing, looking at her with a benign smile. She let the arrow fly. Now Pharaoh was about as deadly with a bow as it's possible to be. The 10 dead soldiers could have testified to that if they'd been able. 6 of them had her arrows sticking out of them, and in that fight she hadn't missed once. She couldn't remember missing at close range, however quickly the shot had been taken. And she'd killed men 10 times further away than this smiling old bastard was now. But this time, she missed. The arrow seemed to curve in the air. A bad feather, maybe, but it still didn't seem quite right. The old man didn't flinch, not even a hair. He simply stood, smiling, exactly where he'd always stood, and the arrow missed him by a few inches and disappeared off down the hillside. And that gave everyone time to consider the situation. He was a strange one, this old man. Very dark-skinned, black as coal, which meant he was from the far south, across the wide and shelterless desert. That's a journey not lightly taken, and Pharaoh had rarely seen such people. Tall and thin, with long, sinewy arms and a simple robe wrapped round him. There were strange bangles round his wrists, stacked up so they covered half his forearms, glittering dark and light in the savage sun. His hair was a mass of gray ropes about his face, some hanging down as low as his waist, and there was a gray stubble on his lean, pointed jaw. He had a big water skin wrapped around his chest, and a bunch of leather bags hanging from a belt around his waist. Nothing else. No weapon. That was the strangest thing of all. For a man out here in the Badlands, no one came to this god-forsaken place except those who were running, and those sent to hunt them. In either case, they should be well armed. He was no soldier of Gurkhul. He was no scum, come looking for the money on her head. He was no bandit, no escaped slave. What was he then, and why was he here? He must have come for her. He could be one of them. An eater. Who else would wander the Badlands without a weapon? She hadn't realized they wanted her that badly. He stood there motionless, the old man, smiling at her. She reached slowly for another arrow, and his eyes followed her without any worry. "That really isn't necessary," he said in a slow, deep voice. She knocked the arrow to her bow. The old man didn't move. She shrugged her shoulders and took her time aiming. The old man smiled on, not a care in the world. She let the arrow fly. It missed him by a few inches again, this time on the other side, and shot off down the hillside. Once was a possibility. She had to admit that, but twice was wrong. If Pharaoh knew one thing, and one thing only, she knew how to kill. The old fool should have been stuck through and bleeding out his last into the stony soil. Now, simply by standing still and smiling, he seemed to be saying, "You know less than you think. I know more." That was very galling. "Who are you, you old bastard?" "They call me Yulwai. Old bastard will do for you." She tossed her bow down on the ground, let her arms drop to her side so that her right hand was hidden from him by her body. She twisted her wrist and the curved knife dropped out of her sleeve and into her waiting palm. There are many ways to kill a man, and if one way fails, you must try another. Pharaoh had never been one to give up at the first stumble. Yulwai began to move slowly towards her, his bare feet padding on the rocks, bangles jingling softly together. That was very strange, now she thought about it. If he made a noise every time he moved, how had he managed to sneak up on her? "What do you want?" "I want to help you." He came forward until he was just over an arm's length away. Then he stopped and stood, grinning at her. Now Pharaoh was fast as a snake with a knife and twice as deadly, as the last of those soldiers could have testified had he been able. The blade was a shining blur in the air, swung with all her strength and all her fury behind it. If he had been standing where she thought he was, his head would have been hanging off. Only he wasn't. He was standing about a stride to the left. She threw herself at him with a fighting scream, ramming the glittering point of the knife into his heart. But she stabbed only air. He was back where he had been before, motionless and smiling all the while. Very strange. She patted round him, cautious, sandaled feet scuffing in the dust, left hand circling in the air in front of her, right hand gripped tight round the handle of the knife. She had to be careful, there was magic here. There is no need to get angry. "I am here to help." "Fuck your help," she hissed back at him. "But you need it, and badly. They are coming for you, Pharaoh. There are soldiers in the hills, many soldiers. You'll outrun them. There are too many. You cannot outrun them all." She glanced round at the punctured bodies. "Then I'll give them to the vultures. Not this time. They are not alone. They have help." On the word help, his deep voice dropped even lower. Pharaoh frowned. "Priests? Yes, and more besides." His eyes went very wide. "An eater," he whispered. "They mean to take you alive. The Emperor wants to make an example of you. He has it in mind to put you on display." She snorted. "Fuck the Emperor." "I heard you already did," she growled and raised the knife again. But it was not a knife. There was a hissing snake in her hand, a deadly snake with its mouth open to bite. "Ugh!" She threw it on the ground, stamped her foot down on its head, but she stamped on her knife instead. The blade snapped with a sharp crack. "They will catch you," said the old man. "They will catch you, and they will break your legs with hammers in the city square, so you can never run again. Then they will parade you through the streets of Shaffa, naked, sitting backwards on an ass, with your hair shaved off, while the people line the streets and shout insults at you." She frowned at him, but Yulwai did not stop. "They will starve you to death in a cage before the palace, cooking in the hot sun, while the good people of Gurkhal taunt you and spit on you and throw dung at you through the bars. Perhaps they will give you piss to drink if you are lucky. When you finally die, they will let you rot, and the flies will eat you bit by bit, and all the other slaves will see what freedom looks like, and decide they are better off as they are." Pharaoh was bored with this. Let them come, and the eater too. She wouldn't die in a cage. She would cut her own throat, if it came to that. She turned her back on him with a scowl and snatched up the shovel, started digging away furiously at the last grave. Soon it was deep enough for the scum who'd be rotting in it. She turned around. Yulwai was kneeling down by the dying soldier, giving him water from the skin around his chest. "Fuck!" she shouted, striding over, her fingers locked around the handle of the shovel. The old man got to his feet as she came close. "Mercy," croaked the soldier, stretching out his hand. "I'll give you mercy." The edge of the shovel bit deep into the soldier's skull. The body twitched briefly, then was still. She turned to the old man with a look of triumph. He stared back sadly. There was something in his eyes. Pity, maybe. "What do you want, Pharaoh Maljin?" "What? Why did you do that?" Yulwai pointed down at the dead man. "What do you want? Vengeance." She spat out the word. On all of them, on the whole nation of Gurkhal. Yes, but she wasn't very happy. She couldn't remember what it felt like. The smile seemed strange, unfamiliar, all lopsided. And is vengeance all you think of, every minute of every day, your only desire? Yes, hurting them. Killing them. Killing them, ending them? Yes. You want nothing for yourself? She paused. What? For yourself. What do you want? She stared at the old man suspiciously, but no reply came to her. Ylvi shook his head sadly. It seems to me, Pharaoh Malgin, that you are as much a slave as you ever were, or ever could be. He sat down, cross-legged on a rock. She stared at him for a moment, confused. Then the anger bubbled up again, hot and reassuring. If you came to help me, you can help me bury them. She pointed over at the 3 bloody corpses, lined up next to the graves. Oh no, that is your work. She turned away from the old man, cursing under her breath, then moved over to her one-time companions. She took Shebed's corpse under the arms and hauled him over to the first grave, his heels making 2 little grooves in the dust. When she made it to the hole, she rolled him in. Alagai was next. A stream of dry soil ran over him as he came to rest in the bottom of his grave. She turned to Nazar's carcass. He had been killed by a sword cut across the face. Pharaoh thought it was something of an improvement to his looks. That one looks a good sort, said Yulwei. Nazar, she laughed without amusement. A raper, a thief, a coward. She hawked up some phlegm and spat into his dead face. It splattered softly against his forehead. Much the worst of the 3. She looked down at the graves. But they were all of them shit. Nice company you keep. The hunted don't have the luxury of choosing their companions. She stared at Nazar's bloody face. You take what's offered. If you dislike them so much, why don't you leave them for the vultures, like you have these others? Yulwai swept his arm over the broken soldiers on the ground. You bury your own. She kicked Nazar into the hole. He rolled forward, arms flopping, and dropped into the grave face down. That's the way it's always been. She grabbed hold of the shovel and started to heap the stony earth onto his back. She worked in silence, the sweat building up on her face, then dripping off onto the ground. Yulwei watched her as the holes filled up. 3 more piles of dirt in the wasteland. She threw the shovel away and it bounced off one of the corpses and clattered among the stones. A small cloud of black flies buzzed angrily off the body, then returned. Pharaoh picked up her bow and arrows and slung them over her shoulder. She took the water skin, checked its weight carefully, then shouldered that also. Then she picked over the bodies of the soldiers. One of them, he looked like the leader, had a fine curved sword. He hadn't even managed to draw it before her arrow had caught him in the throat. Pharaoh drew it now, and she tested it with a couple of sweeps through the air. It was very good, well balanced, the long blade glittering deadly sharp, bright metal on the hilt catching the sun. He had a knife as well that matched it. She took the weapons and stuck them through her belt. She picked over the other bodies, but there wasn't much to take. She cut her arrows from the corpses where she could. She found some coins and tossed them away. They would only weigh her down. And what would she buy out here in the Badlands? Dirt? That was all there was, and it was free. They had a few scraps of food with them, but not enough even for another day. That meant there must be others, probably lots of them, and not far away. Yulwei was telling the truth, but it made no difference to her. She turned and started to walk southward, down off the hill and towards the great desert, leaving the old man behind. That's the wrong way, he said. She stopped, squinting at him in the bright sun. Aren't the soldiers coming? Yulwei's eyes sparkled. There are many ways of staying unnoticed even out here in the Badlands. She looked to the north out over the featureless plain below. Out towards Gurkhal, there wasn't a hill or a tree, or scarcely a bush for miles. Nowhere to hide, unnoticed even by an eater. The old man laughed. Especially by those arrogant swine. They're not half as clever as they think they are. How do you think I got here? I came through them, between them, around them. I go where I please, and I take who I please with me. She shaded her eyes with her hand and squinted southward. The desert stretched away into the far distance and beyond. Pharaoh could survive here in the wilderness just about, but out there in that crucible of changing sands and merciless heat. The old man seemed to read her thoughts. There are always the endless sands, I have crossed them before. It can be done. But not by you. He was right. Damn him. Pharaoh was lean and tough as a bowstring, but that just meant she would walk in circles a little longer before pitching on her face. The desert was preferable to the cage before the palace as a place to die, but not by much. She wanted to stay alive. There were still things to do. The old man sat there, cross-legged, smiling. What was he? Pharaoh trusted no one, but if he meant to deliver her to the emperor, he could have knocked her on the head while she was digging, instead of announcing his arrival. He had magic. She had seen that for herself, and some chance was better than none. But what would he want in return? The world had never given Pharaoh anything for free, and she didn't expect it to begin now. She narrowed her eyes. "What do you want from me, Yulwei?" The old man laughed. That laugh was becoming very annoying. "Let us just say that I will have done you a favor. Later on, you can do me one in return." That answer was horribly thin on the details, but when your life's on the table, you have to take whatever's offered. She hated to place herself in the power of another, but it seemed she had no choice. Not if she wanted to live out the week, that is. What do we do? "We must wait for nightfall." Yulwei glanced at the twisted bodies scattered about the ground and wrinkled his nose. "But perhaps not here." Pharaoh shrugged and sat herself down on the middle grave. "Here will do," she said. "I have a mind to watch the vultures eat." Overhead the clear night sky was scattered with bright stars, and the air had turned cool, cold even. Down on the dark and dusty plain below, fires were burning, a curved line of fires that seemed to hem them in against the edge of the desert. She, Yulwei, the 10 corpses and the 3 graves were trapped on the hillside. Tomorrow, as the first light crept over the arid land, the soldiers would leave those fires and creep carefully towards the hills. If Pharaoh was still there when they arrived, she would be killed for sure, or worse still, captured. She could not fight that many on her own, even supposing there was no eater with them. She hated to admit it, but her life was in Yulwei's hands now. He squinted up at the starry sky. "It is time," he said. They scrambled down the rocky hillside in the darkness, picking their way carefully among the boulders and the odd scrubby, half-dead bush, northward towards Gurkul. Yulwei moved surprisingly fast, and she was forced to half-run to keep up, eyes fixed on the ground to find her footing among the dry rocks. When they finally reached the base of the hill and she looked up, she saw that Yulwei was leading her toward the left-hand edge of the line, where the fires were most numerous. "Wait," she whispered, grabbing his shoulder. She pointed over to the right-hand side. There were fewer fires there, and it would be easier to slip between them. "What about that way?" She could just see Yulwei's teeth smiling white in the starlight. "Oh no, Pharaoh Maljin. That is where most of the soldiers are, and our other friend." He was making no attempt to keep his voice down, and it was making her jumpy. "That is where they expect you to come through, if you choose to go north. But they do not expect you. They think you will go south into the desert to die, rather than risk being captured, as indeed you would have done, had I not been here." Yulwei turned and moved off, and she crept after him, keeping low to the ground. As they drew nearer to the fires, she saw that the old man had been right. There were figures sitting around some of them, but they were thinly spread. The old man strode confidently toward 4 fires on the far left, only one of them manned. He made no effort to stay low. His bangles jingled softly together. His bare feet flapped loud on the dry earth. They were almost close enough to see the features of the 3 men round the fire. Yulwei would surely be seen at any moment. She hissed at him to grab his attention, sure that she would be heard. Yulwei turned round, looking puzzled in the faint light from the flames. "What?" he said. She winced, waiting for the soldiers to leap up, but they chattered on regardless. Yulwei looked over at them. "They will not see us, nor hear us either, unless you start shouting in their ears. We are safe." He turned and walked on, giving the soldiers a wide berth. Pharaoh followed, still keeping low and quiet, if only out of habit. As Pharaoh came closer, she began to make out the words of the soldiers' conversation. She slowed, listening. She turned. She started to move towards the fire. Yulwei looked round. "What are you doing?" he asked. Pharaoh looked at the 3 of them, a big, tough-looking veteran, a thin, weaselly type, and an honest-seeming young man who didn't look much like a soldier. Their weapons were lying around, sheathed, wrapped up, unready. She circled them warily, listening. "They say she's not right in the head," the thin one was whispering at the young one, trying to scare him. They say she's killed 100 men or more. If you're a good-looking fella, she cuts your fruits off while you're still alive. He grabbed hold of his crotch, and eats them in front of you. Ah, stop your mouth, said the big one. She won't be coming near us. He pointed over to where the fires were sparser, his voice dropping to a whisper. She'll be going to him if she comes this way at all. Well, I hope she doesn't, said the young one. Live and let live, say I. The thin man frowned. And what about all the good men she's killed? And women and children too? Shouldn't they have been let live? Pharaoh's teeth ground together. She'd never killed children that she could think of. Well, it's a shame for them, of course. I'm not saying she shouldn't be caught. The young soldier glanced around nervously. Just maybe not by us. The big man let go a laugh at that, but the thin one didn't look amused. You a coward? No, said the young man angrily. But I got a wife and a family depending on me, and I could do without being killed out here. That's all, he grinned. We're expecting another child, hoping for a son this time. The big man nodded. My son's nearly grown now. They get old so quick. Talk of children and families and hopes only made the fury in Pharaoh's chest squeeze harder. Why should they be allowed a life when she had nothing? When them and their kind had taken everything from her? She slid the curved knife out of its sheath. What are you doing, Pharaoh? Hissed Yulwei. The young man looked round. Did you hear something? The big one laughed. I think I heard you shit yourself. The thin one chuckled to himself. The young man smiled, embarrassed. Pharaoh crept right up behind him. She was just a foot or two away, brightly lit by the fire, but none of the soldiers even glanced at her. She raised the knife. Pharaoh! Shouted Yulwei. The young man sprang to his feet. He peered out across the dark plain, squinting, brow furrowed. He looked Pharaoh right in the face, but his eyes were focused far behind her. She could smell his breath. The blade of the knife glittered an inch or less from his stubbly throat. Now, she could kill him quickly and take the other two as well before the alarm was raised. She knew she could do it. They were unprepared, and she was ready. Now was the time. But her hand didn't move. What's got up your arse? Asked the big soldier. There's nothing out there. Cody's sworn I heard something, said the young man, still looking right in her face. Wait, shouted the thin one, jumping to his feet and pointing. There she is, right in front of you. Pharaoh froze for an instant, staring at him. Then he and the big man started to laugh. The young soldier looked sheepish, turned around and sat down. I thought I heard something. That's all. There's no one out there, said the big man. Pharaoh began to back slowly away. She felt sick, her mouth full of sour spit, her head thumping. She pushed the knife back into its sheath, turned and stumbled off with Yulwei following silently behind. When the light of the fires and the sound of the talking had faded into the distance, she stopped and dropped down on the hard ground. A cold wind blew up across the barren plain. It blew stinging dust in her face, but she hardly noticed. The hate and the fury were gone for the time being, but they had left a hole, and she had nothing else to fill it with. She felt empty and cold and sick and alone. She hugged herself, rocking slowly back and forth, and closed her eyes. But the darkness held no comfort. Then she felt the old man's hand press onto her shoulder. Now normally she would have twisted away, thrown him off, killed him if she could. But the strength was all gone. She looked up, blinking. There's nothing left of me. What am I? She pressed one hand on her chest, but she barely felt it. I have nothing inside. Well, it's strange that you should say that. Yulwei smiled up at the starry sky. I was just starting to think there might be something in there worth saving. Chapter 4. The King's Justice. As soon as he reached the square of marshals, Jezal realized there was something wrong. It was never half this busy for a meeting of the Open Council. He glanced over the knots of finely dressed people as he hurried by, slightly late and out of breath from his long training session. Voices were hushed, faces tense and expectant. He shouldered his way through the crowd to the Lord's Round, glancing suspiciously up at the guards flanking the inlaid doors. They at least seemed the same as ever, their heavy visors giving nothing away. He crossed the antechamber, vivid tapestries flapping slightly in the draught, slipped through the inner doors, and passed into the vast, cool space beyond. His footsteps made tapping echoes in the gilded dome as he hurried down the aisle towards the high table. Jalenhorn was standing beneath one of the tall windows, face splashed with colored light from the stained glass, frowning at a bench with a metal rail along its base, which had been placed to one side of the floor. "What's going on? Haven't you heard?" Jalenholm's voice was whispery with excitement. "Hoff's let it be known there'll be some great matter to discuss." "What is it? England? The Northmen?" The big man shook his head. "Don't know, but we'll soon see." Jezal frowned. "I don't like surprises." His eye came to rest on the mysterious bench. "What's that for?" At that moment, the great doors were swung open, and a stream of counselors began to flood down the aisle. The usual mixture, Jezal supposed, if a little more purposeful. The younger sons, the paid representatives. He caught his breath. There was a tall man at the front, richly dressed even in this august company, with a weighty golden chain across his shoulders, and a weighty frown across his face. "Lord Brock himself," whispered Jezal. "And there's Lord Isher." Jalenholm nodded at a sedate old man just behind Brock, "and Huygen, and Berezin. It's something big. It has to be." Jezal took a deep breath as 4 of the Union's most powerful noblemen arranged themselves on the front row. He had never seen the open council half so well attended. On the councillors' half-circle of benches there was barely an empty seat. High above them, the public gallery was an unbroken ring of nervous faces. Now Hoff blustered through the doors and down the aisle, and he was not alone. On his right, a tall man flowed along, slender and proud-looking, with a long, spotless white coat and a shock of white hair. Archlector Zult. On his left walked another man, leaning heavily on a stick slightly bent in a robe of black and gold with a long grey beard. High Justice Morovia? Jezal could hardly believe his eyes. 3 members of the closed council here. Jalenholm hurried to take his place as the clerks deposited their burdens of ledgers and papers on the polished tabletop. The Lord Chamberlain threw himself down in their midst, and immediately called for wine. The head of His Majesty's Inquisition swept into a high chair on one side of him, smiling faintly to himself. High Justice Morovia lowered himself slowly into another, frowning all the while. The volume of the anxious whispering in the hall rose a step. The faces of the great magnates on the front row were grim and suspicious. The announcer took his place before the table, not the usual brightly dressed imbecile, but a dark bearded man with a barrel chest. He lifted his staff high, then beat it against the tiles, fit to wake the dead. "I call this meeting of the Open Council of the Union to order," he bellowed. The hubbub gradually died away. "There is but one matter for discussion this morning," said the Lord Chamberlain, peering sternly at the House from beneath his heavy brows. "A matter of the King's justice." There were scattered mutterings. A matter concerning the royal license for trade in the city of Westport. The noise increased. Angry whispers, uncomfortable shufflings of noble arses on their benches, the familiar scratching of quills on the great ledgers. Jezal saw Lord Brock's brows draw together, the corners of Lord Huygen's mouth turn down. They did not seem to like the taste of this. The Lord Chamberlain sniffed and took a swig of wine, waiting for the muttering to die away. "I am not best qualified to speak on this matter, however. No, indeed," snapped Lord Isher sharply, shifting in his seat on the front row with a scowl. Hoff fixed the old man with his eye. "So I call on a man who is. My colleague from the closed council, Archlector Salt. The Open Council recognizes Archlector Salt." "The Open Council recognizes Archlector Salt," thundered the announcer, as the head of the Inquisition made his graceful way down the steps of the dais and onto the tiled floor, smiling pleasantly at the angry faces turned towards him. "My lords," he began, in a slow, musical voice, ushering his words out into space with smooth movements of his hands. "For the past 7 years, ever since our glorious victory in the war with Gurkhal, an exclusive royal license for trade in the city of Westport has been in the hands of the Honourable Guild of Mercers. And a fine job they've done of it," shouted Lord Huygen. "They won us that war," growled Berezin, pounding the bench beside him with a meaty fist. "A fine job. Fine," came the cries. The Archlector nodded as he waited for the noise to fade. "Indeed they have," he said, pacing across the tiles like a dancer, his words scratching their way across the pages of the books. "I would be the last to deny it. A fine job." He spun suddenly around, the tails of his white coat snapping, his face twisted into a brutal snarl. "A fine job of dodging the king's taxes," he screamed. There was a collective gasp. "A fine job of slighting the king's law." Another gasp. Louder. "A fine job of high treason." There was a storm of protest, of fists shaken in the air and papers thrown to the floor. Livid faces stared down from the public gallery. Florid ones ranted and bellowed from the benches before the high table. Jezal stared about him, unsure if he could have heard correctly. "How dare you, salt?" Lord Brock roared at the archlector as he swished back up the steps of the dais, a faint smile clinging to his lips. "We demand proof," bellowed Lord Hugon. "We demand justice." "The king's justice," came cries from the back. "You must supply us with proof," shouted Isher, as the noise began to fade. The archlector twitched out his white gown, the fine material billowing around him as he swung himself smoothly back into his chair. "Oh, but that is our intention, Lord Isher." The heavy bolt of a small side door was flung back with an echoing bang. There was a rustling as lords and proxies twisted round, stood up, squinted over to see what was happening. People in the public gallery peered out over the parapet, leaning dangerously far in their eagerness to see. The hall fell quiet. Jezal swallowed. There was a scraping, tapping, clinking sound beyond the doorway. Then a strange and sinister procession emerged from the darkness. Sandan Glokta came first, limping as always and leaning heavily on his cane, but with his head held high and a twisted, toothless grin on his hollow face. 3 men shuffled behind him, chained together by their hands and bare feet, clinking and rattling their way towards the high table. Their heads were shaved bare and they were dressed in brown sackcloth, the clothing of the penitent, confessed traitors. The first of the prisoners was licking his lips, eyes darting here and there, pale with terror. The second, shorter and thicker set, was stumbling, dragging his left leg behind him, hunched over with his mouth hanging open. As Jezal watched, a thin line of pink drool dangled from his lip and spattered on the tiles. The third man, painfully thin and with huge dark rings round his eyes, stared slowly around, blinking, eyes wide but apparently taking nothing in. Jezal recognized the man behind the 3 prisoners straight away, the big albino from that night in the street. Jezal rocked his weight from one foot to the other, feeling suddenly cold and uncomfortable. The purpose of the bench was now made clear. The 3 prisoners slumped down on it. The albino knelt and snapped their manacles shut around the rail along its base. "Our investigation began some months ago," said Archlector Salt, immensely smug at having the assembly so completely under his control. "A simple matter of some irregular accounting. I won't bore you with the details." He smiled at Brock, at Isher, at Berezin. "I know you all are very busy men. Who could have thought then that such a little matter would lead us here? Who would suppose that the roots of treason could run so very deep?" "Indeed," said the Lord Chamberlain impatiently, looking up from his goblet. "Inquisitor Glokta, the floor is yours." The announcer struck his staff on the tiles. "The Open Council of the Union recognizes Sandan Glokta, Inquisitor exempt." The cripple waited politely for the scratching of the clerk's quills to finish, leaning on his cane in the center of the floor, seemingly unmoved by the importance of the occasion. "Rise and face the Open Council," he said, turning to the first of his prisoners. The terrified man sprang up, his chains rattling, licking his pale lips, goggling at the faces of the lords in the front row. "Your name?" demanded Glokta. "Salem Ruse." Jezal felt a catch in his throat. Salem Ruse. He knew the man. His father had had dealings with him in the past. At one time he had been a regular visitor to their estate. Jezal studied the terrified, shaven-headed traitor with increasing horror. He cast his mind back to the plump, well-dressed merchant, always ready with a joke. It was him, no doubt. Their eyes met for an instant and Jezal looked anxiously away. His father had talked with that man in their hallway, had shaken hands with him. Accusations of treason are like illnesses, you can catch them just by being in the same room. His eyes were drawn inevitably back to that unfamiliar, yet horribly familiar face. "How dare he be a traitor, the bastard?" "You are a member of the Honorable Guild of Mercers," continued Glokta, putting a sneering accent into the word. "Honorable?" "I was," mumbled Ruse. "What was your What was your role?" The shaven-headed mercer stared desperately about him. "Your role?" demanded Glokta, his voice taking on a hard edge. I conspired to defraud the king, cried the merchant, wringing his hands. A wave of shock ran round the hall. Jezal swallowed sour spit. He saw Salt smirking across at High Justice Morovia. The old man's face was stony blank, but his fists were clenched tight on the table before him. I committed treason. For money, I smuggled, and I bribed and I lied. We were all at it. All at it. Glokta leered round at the assembly. And if any of you should doubt it, we have ledgers, and we have documents, and we have numbers. There is a room in the House of Questions stuffed with them, a room full of secrets, and guilt, and lies. He slowly shook his head. Sorry reading, I can tell you. I had to do it, screamed Ruse. They made me. I had no choice. The crippled inquisitor frowned at his audience. Of course they made you. We realize you were but a single brick in this house of infamy. An attempt was made on your life recently, was it not? They tried to kill me. Who tried? It was this man, wailed Ruse, voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at the prisoner next to him, pulling away as far as the chains that linked them would allow. It was him. Him. The manacles rattled as he waved his arm, spit flying from his mouth. There was another surge of angry voices, louder this time. Jezal watched the head of the middle prisoner sag, and he slumped sideways, but the hulking albino grabbed him and hauled him back upright. "Wake up, Master Carpi!" shouted Glokta. The lolling head came slowly up, an unfamiliar face, strangely swollen and badly pocked with acne scars. Jezal noticed with disgust that his 4 front teeth were missing, just like Glokta's. "You are from Talons, yes, in Styria?" The man nodded slowly, stupidly, like someone half asleep. "You were paid to kill people, yes?" He nodded again. "And you were hired to murder 10 of His Majesty's subjects, among them this confessed traitor, Salem Ruse?" A trickle of blood ran slowly out from the man's nose, and his eyes started to roll back in his head. The albino shook him by the shoulder, and he came round, nodding groggily. "What became of the other 9? Silence. You killed them, did you not?" Another nod, a strange clicking sound coming from the prisoner's throat. Glokta frowned slowly around the rapt faces of the council. Vildan Rob, customs official, throat cut ear to ear. He slid a finger across his neck, and a woman in the gallery squealed. Solimoskandi Mercer, stabbed in the back 4 times. He thrust up 4 fingers, then pressed them to his stomach as though sickened. The bloody list goes on. All murdered for nothing but a bigger profit. "Him," croaked the killer, turning his swollen face to look at the gaunt man with the glassy eyes, slumped on the bench next to him, heedless of his surroundings. Glokta limped over, cane tapping on the tiles. "What is your name?" The prisoner's head snapped up, his eyes focusing on the twisted face of the inquisitor above him. "Goffred Hornlack," he answered instantly, voice shrill. "You are a senior member of the Guild of Mercers, yes," he barked, blinking mindlessly up at Glokta. "One of Magister Kalt's deputies, in fact. Yes. Have you conspired with other mercers to defraud His Majesty the King? Did you hire an assassin to murder 10 of His Majesty's subjects?" "Yes, yes. Why, we're worried they would tell what they knew." "Tell what they knew?" "Tell." Hornlack's empty eyes stared off towards one of the colored windows. His mouth slowly stopped moving. "Tell what they knew," prompted the inquisitor. "About the treasonous activities of the guild," the mercer blurted. "About our treasons, about the activities of the guild, treasonous activities," Glokta cut in sharply. "Were you acting alone?" "No, no." The inquisitor wrapped his cane down before him and leaned forward. "Who gave the orders?" he hissed. "Magister Kalt," shouted Hornlack instantly. "He gave the orders!" The audience gasped. Archlector Salt smirked a little wider. "It was the Magister." The quill scratched mercilessly. "It was Kalt. He gave the orders. All the orders." "Thank you, Master Hornlack." "The Magister. He gave the orders. Magister Kalt, Kalt, Kalt." "Enough," snogged Glokta. His prisoner fell silent. The room was still. Archlector Salt lifted his arm and pointed towards the 3 prisoners. "There is your proof, my lords. This is a sham," bellowed Lord Brock, leaping to his feet. "This is an insult." Few voices joined him in support, however, and those that did were half-hearted. Lord Hugon was notable for his careful silence, keenly studying the fine leather of his shoes. Berezin had shrunk back into his seat, looking half the size he had been a minute before. Lord Isher was staring off at the wall, fingering his heavy golden chain, looking bored, as though the fate of the Guild of Mercers was of interest to him no longer. Brock appealed to the High Justice himself, motionless in his tall chair at the high table. "Lord Morovia, I beg of you. You are a reasonable man. Do not allow this travesty." The hall fell silent, waiting for the old man's reply. He frowned and stroked his long beard. He glanced across at the grinning archlector. He cleared his throat. "I feel your pain, Lord Brock, indeed I do, but it seems that this is not a day for reasonable men. The closed council has examined the case and is well satisfied. My hands are tied." Brock worked his mouth, tasting defeat. "This is not justice," he shouted, turning round to address his peers. "These men have plainly been tortured." Archlector Salt's mouth twisted with scorn. "How would you have us deal with traitors and criminals?" he cried in a piercing voice. "Would you raise a shield, Lord Brock, for the disloyal to hide behind?" He thumped the table, as if it too might be guilty of high treason. "I, for one, will not see our great nation handed over to its enemies, neither enemies without nor enemies within. Down with the Mercers," came a cry from the public balcony. "Down with the Mercers," came a cry from the public balcony. "Hard justice for traitors. The King's justice," bellowed a fat man near the back. There was a surge of anger and agreement from the floor, and calls for harsh measures and stiff penalties. Brock looked round for his allies on the front row, but found none. He bunched his fists. "This is no justice," he shouted, pointing at the three prisoners. "This is no proof. His Majesty disagrees," bellowed Hoff, "and does not require your permission." He held up a large document. "The Guild of Mercers is hereby dissolved, their license revoked by royal decree. His Majesty's Commission for Trade and Commerce will, over the coming months, review applications for trade rights with the city of Westport. Until such time as suitable candidates are found, the routes will be managed by capable, loyal hands, the hands of His Majesty's Inquisition." Archlector Salt humbly inclined his head, oblivious to the furious cries from representatives and public gallery alike. "Inquisitor Glokta," continued the Lord Chamberlain, "the Open Council thanks you for your diligence, and asks that you perform one more service in this matter." Hoff held out a smaller paper. "This is a warrant for the arrest of Magister Colt, bearing the King's own signature. We would ask that you serve it forthwith." Glokta bowed stiffly and took the paper from the Lord Chamberlain's outstretched hand. "You," said Hoff, turning his eye on Jalenhorn. "Lieutenant Jalenhorn, my lord," shouted the big man, stepping smartly forward. "Whatever," snapped Hoff impatiently. "Take 20 of the King's own and escort Inquisitor Glokta to the Mercers' Guild Hall. Ensure that nothing and no one leaves the building without his orders." "At once, my lord." Jalenhorn crossed the floor and ran up the aisle toward the exit, holding the hilt of his sword in one hand to stop it knocking against his leg. Glokta limped after him, cane tapping on the steps. The warrant for the arrest of Magister Colt crumpled in his tightly clenched fist. The monstrous albino had pulled the prisoners to their feet meanwhile, and was leading them, rattling and lolling, off towards the door by which they had entered. "Lord Chamberlain!" shouted Brock with one last effort. Jezal wondered how much money he must have made from the Mercers. How much he had hoped still to make. A very great deal, evidently. But Hoff was unmoved. "That concludes our business for today, my lords." Morovia was on his feet before the Lord Chamberlain had finished speaking, evidently keen to be away. The great ledgers were thumped shut. The fate of the Honorable Guild of Mercers was sealed. Excited babbling filled the air once more, gradually rising in volume, and soon joined by clattering and stamping, as the representatives began to rise and leave the room. Archlector Zolt remained seated, watching his beaten adversaries file reluctantly off the front row. Jezal met the desperate eyes of Salem Ruse one last time as he was led towards the small door. Then Practical Frost jerked at the chain, and he was lost in the darkness beyond. Outside, the square was even busier than before, the dense throng growing ever more excited as the news of the dissolution of the Guild of Mercers spread to those who had not been within. People stood, disbelieving, or hurried here and there, scared, surprised, confused. Jezal saw one man staring at him, staring at anyone, face pale, hands trembling. A mercer, perhaps, or a man in too deep with the mercers, deep enough to be ruined along with them. There would be many such men. Jezal felt a sudden tingling. Artie West was leaning casually against the stones a little further on. They had not met in some time. Not since that drunken outburst of hers. And he was surprised how pleased he was to see her. Probably she had been punished long enough, he told himself. Everyone deserved the chance to apologize. He hastened towards her with a broad smile on his lips. Then he noticed who she was with. "That little bastard," he muttered under his breath. Lieutenant Brint was chatting freely in his cheap uniform, leaning closer to R.D. than Jezal thought was appropriate, underlining his tedious points with flamboyant gestures of his arms. She was nodding, smiling. Then she tipped her head back and laughed, slapping the lieutenant playfully on the chest. Brint laughed as well, the ugly little shit. They laughed together. For some reason, Jezal felt a sharp pang of fury. "Jezal, how are you?" shouted Brint, still giggling. He stepped up close. "That's Captain Luthar," he spat. "And how I am is none of your concern." "Don't you have a job to do?" Brint's mouth hung stupidly open for a moment. Then his brows drew into a surly frown. "Yes, sir," he muttered, turning and stalking off. Jezal watched him go with a contempt even more intense than usual. "Well, that was charming," said R.D. "Ari, those the manners you should use before a lady. I really couldn't say. Why? Was there one watching?" He turned to look at her and caught, just for a moment, a self-satisfied smirk, quite a nasty expression, as though she had enjoyed his outburst. He wondered for a silly instant whether she might have arranged the meeting, have placed herself, and that idiot where Jezal would see them, hoping to arouse his jealousy. Then she smiled at him, and laughed, and Jezal felt his anger fading. She looked very fine, he thought, tanned and vibrant in the sunlight, laughing out loud, not caring who heard. Very fine. Better than ever, in fact. A chance meeting was all. What else could it be? She fixed him with those dark eyes and his suspicions vanished. "Did you have to be so hard on him?" she asked. Jezal fixed his jaw, jumped up. "Arrogant nobody. He's probably nothing more than some rich man's bastard. No blood, no money, no manners more than me. Of all three." Jezal cursed his big mouth. Rather than dragging an apology from her, he was now in need of giving one himself. He sought desperately for some way out of this self-made trap. "Oh, but he's an absolute moron," he whined. "Well," and Jezal was relieved to see one corner of R.D.'s mouth curl up in a sly smile. "He is at that. Shall we walk?" She slipped her hand through his arm before he had the chance to answer, and started to lead him off towards the Kingsway. Jezal allowed himself to be guided between the frightened, the angry, the excited people. "So is it true?" she asked. "Is what true? That the mercers are finished?" "So it seems. Your old friend Sandan Glokta was in the thick of it. He gave quite the performance, for a cripple." R.D. looked down at the floor. "You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him, crippled or no?" "No." Jezal's mind went back to Salem Rue's terrified eyes, staring desperately at him as he vanished into the darkness of the archway. "No, you wouldn't." A silence descended on them as they strolled down the avenue, but it was a comfortable one. He liked walking with her. It no longer seemed important whether anyone apologized. Perhaps she had been right about the fencing anyway, just a little. R.D. seemed to read his thoughts. "How's the swordplay going?" she asked. "Not bad." "How's the drinking going?" She raised a dark eyebrow. "Excellent. Well, if only there was a contest for that every year, I'd soon come to the attention of the public." Jezal laughed, looking down at her as she walked beside him, and she smiled back. So clever, so sharp, so fearless, so damn fine-looking. Jezal wondered if there had ever been a woman quite like her. If only she had the right blood, he thought to himself, and some money. A lot of money. Chapter 5. Means of Escape. "Open the door. In the name of His Majesty," thundered Lieutenant Jalenhorn for the third time, hammering at the wood with his meaty fist. The great oath. "Why do big men tend to have such little brains?" "Perhaps they get by on brawn too often, and their minds dry up like plums in the sun." The Mercer's Guildhall was an impressive building in a busy square not far from the Agrient. A substantial crowd of onlookers had already gathered around Glokta and his armed escort. Curious, fearful, fascinated, growing all the time. They can smell blood, it seems. Glokta's leg was throbbing from the effort of hurrying down here, but he doubted that the Mercers would be taken entirely by surprise. He glanced round impatiently at the armored guardsmen, at the masked practicals, at the hard eyes of Frost, at the young officer beating on the door. "Open enough of this foolishness. I think they heard you, Lieutenant," said Glokta crisply, "but are choosing not to answer. Would you be so kind as to break the door down?" "What?" Jezal gawped at him, and then at the heavy double doors, firmly secured. "How will I?" Practical Frost hurtled past. There was a deafening crack and a tearing of wood as he crashed into one of the doors with his burly shoulder, tearing it off its hinges and sending it crashing onto the floor of the room beyond. "Like so," muttered Glokta as he stepped through the archway, the splinters still settling. Jezal followed him, looking dazed, a dozen armored soldiers clattering behind. An outraged clerk blocked the corridor beyond. "You can't just oof," he cried, as Frost flung him out of the way and his face crunched into the wall. "Arrest that man!" shouted Glokta, waving his cane at the dumbstruck clerk. One of the soldiers grabbed him roughly with gauntleted fists and shoved him tumbling out into the daylight. Practicals began to pour through the broken doors, heavy sticks in their hands, eyes fierce above their masks. "Arrest everyone!" shouted Glokta over his shoulder, limping down the corridor as fast as he could, following Frost's broad back into the bowels of the building. Through an open door, Glokta saw a merchant in colorful robes, face covered with a sheen of sweat as he desperately heaped documents onto a blazing fire. "Sides him!" screamed Glokta. A pair of practicals leaped past into the room and began clubbing the man with their sticks. He fell with a cry, upsetting a table and kicking over a pile of ledgers. Loose papers and bits of burning ash fluttered through the air as the sticks rose and fell. Glokta hurried on, crashes and cries spreading out into the building around him. The place was full of the smell of smoke and sweat and fear. "The doors are all guarded, but Colt might have a secret means of escape. He's a slippery one. We must hope we are not too late. Curse this leg of mine. Not too late." Glokta gasped and winced in pain, tottering as someone clutched at his coat. "Help me!" shrieked the man. "I am innocent!" Blood on a plump face. Fingers clutched at Glokta's clothes, threatening to drag him to the floor. "Get him off me!" shouted Glokta, beating at him weakly with his cane, clawing at the wall in his efforts to stay upright. One of the practicals leaped forward and clubbed the man across the back. "I confess," the merchant whimpered as the stick rose again. Then it cracked down on his head. The practical caught hold of his slumping body under the arms and dragged him back towards the door. Glokta hurried on, Lieutenant Jezal wide-eyed at his shoulder. They reached a broad staircase, and Glokta eyed it with hatred. My old enemies, always here ahead of me. He labored up as best he could, waving Practical Frost forward with his free hand. A baffled merchant was dragged past them and away, squawking something about his rights, heels kicking against the stairs. Glokta slipped and nearly fell on his face, but someone caught him by the elbow and kept him upright. It was Jezal, a look of confusion still splattered across his heavy, honest face. So big men have their uses after all. The young officer helped him up the rest of the steps. Glokta did not have the energy to refuse him. Why bother? A man should know his limitations. There's nothing noble in falling on your face. I should know that. There was a large antechamber at the top of the stairs, richly decorated with a thick carpet and colorful hangings on the walls. 2 guards stood before a large door with their swords drawn, dressed in the livery of the Guild of Mercers. Frost was facing them, hands rolled into white fists. Jezal pulled out his own sword as he reached the landing, stepping forward to stand next to the albino. Glokta had to smile. The tongueless torturer and the flower of chivalry. An unlikely alliance. "I have a warrant for Colt, signed by the king himself." Glokta held out the paper so the guards could see it. "The Mercers are finished. You have nothing to gain by getting in our way. Put up your swords. You have my word. You will not be harmed." The 2 guards glanced at each other uncertainly. "Put them up," shouted Jezal, edging a little closer. "All right." One of the men bent down and slid his sword along the boards. Frost caught it under one foot. "And you," shouted Glokta to the other one. Now! The guard obeyed, throwing his sword to the floor and putting up his hands. A moment later, Frost's fist crunched into the point of his jaw, knocking him cold and sending him crashing into the wall. "But," shouted the first guard. Frost grabbed him by the shirt and flung him down the stairs. He turned over and over, banging on the steps, flopping to the bottom, lying still. "I know what that feels like." Jalenhorn was standing motionless and blinking, his sword still raised. "I thought you said never mind about that." "Frost, look for another way in." The albino padded away down the corridor. Glokta gave him a moment. Then he edged forward and tried the door. The handle turned, much to his surprise, and the door swung open. The room was opulence itself, near as big as a barn. The carving on the high ceiling was caked in gold leaf. The spines of the books on the shelves were studded with precious stones. The monstrous furniture was polished to a mirror shine. All was oversized, over-embellished, over-expensive. But who needs taste when you have money? There were several big windows of the new design, large panes with little lead between them, offering a splendid view of the city, the bay, the ships within it. Magister Colt sat smiling at his vast gilt desk before the middle window in his fabulous robes of office, partly overshadowed by an enormous cabinet, the arms of the Honorable Guild of Mercers etched into its doors. "I have him." Tied around the thick leg of the cabinet was a rope. Glokta followed it with his eyes as it snaked across the floor. The other end was tied around the Magister's neck. "Oh, so he does have a means of escape after all. Inquisitor Glokta." Colt gave a squeaky, nervous laugh. "What a pleasure to finally meet you. I've been hearing all about your investigations." His fingers twitched at the knot on the rope, making sure it was tied securely. "Is your collar too tight, Magister? Perhaps you should remove it?" Another squeak of merriment. "Oh, I don't think so. I don't intend to be answering any of your questions, thank you." Out of the corner of his eye, Glokta saw a side door edging open. A big white hand appeared, fingers curling slowly round the door frame. "Frost. There is still hope of catching him then. I must keep him talking. There are no questions left to answer." "We know it all." "Do you indeed?" giggled the Magister. The albino edged silently into the room, keeping to the shadows near the wall, hidden from Colt by the bulk of the cabinet. "We know about Colleen, about your little arrangement. Imbecile. We had no arrangement. He was far too honorable to be bought. He would never take a mark from me. Then how?" Colt smiled a sick little smile. "Salt secretary," he said, giggling again. "Right under his nose, and yours too, cripple." "Fool, fool, the secretary carried the messages. He saw the confession. He knew everything. I never trusted that smarmy shit." "Colleen was loyal then?" Glokta shrugged. "We all make mistakes." The Magister gave a withering sneer. "Mistakes? That's all you've made, dolt. The world is nothing like you think it is. You don't even know what side you're on. You don't even know what the sides are. I am on the side of the king, and you are not. That is all I need to know. That is all I need to know." Frost had made it to the cabinet and was pressed against it, pink eyes staring intently, trying to see round the corner without being seen. "Just a little longer, just a little further. You know nothing, cripple. Some small business with tax, some petty bribery, that's all we were guilty of. And the trifling matter of 9 murders. We had no choice," screamed Colt. "We never had any choices. We had to pay the bankers. They loaned us the money, and we had to pay. We've been paying them for years. Valent and Balk, the bloodsuckers. We gave them everything. But they always wanted more. Valent and Balk. Bankers." Glokta threw an eye over the ridiculous opulence. "You seem to be keeping your head above water." Seem. All dust. All lies. The bankers own it all. They own us all. We owe them thousands, millions." Colt giggled to himself. "But I don't suppose they'll ever get it now, will they? No, I don't suppose they will." Colt leaned across the desk, the rope hanging down and brushing the leather top. "You want criminals, Glokta? You want traitors, enemies of king and state? Look in the closed council. Look in the House of Questions. Look in the university. Look in the banks, Glokta." He saw Frost, edging round the cabinet no more than 4 strides away. His eyes went wide and he started up from his chair. "Get him!" screamed Glokta. Frost sprang forward, lunged across the desk, caught hold of the flicking hem of Colt's robe of office as the magister span round and hurled himself at the window. "We have him!" There was a sickening rip as the robe tore in Frost's white fist. Colt seemed frozen in space for a moment as all that expensive glass shattered around him, shards and splinters glittering through the air. Then he was gone. The rope snapped taut. "Huh," hissed Frost, glaring at the broken window. "He jumped," gasped Jezal, his mouth hanging open. "Clearly." Glokta limped over to the desk and took the ripped strip of cloth from Frost's hands. Close up it scarcely seemed magnificent at all, brightly colored but badly woven. "Who would have thought?" muttered Glokta to himself. "Poor quality." He limped to the window and peered through the shattered hole. The head of the Honorable Guild of Mercers was swinging slowly back and forth, 20 feet below, his torn gold-embroidered gown flapping around him in the breeze. "Cheap clothes and expensive windows. If the cloth had been stronger, we would have got him. If the window had more lead, we would have got him. Lives hinge on such chances." Beneath him in the street a horrified crowd was already gathering, pointing, babbling, staring up at the hanging body. A woman screamed. Fear or excitement? They sound the same. "Lieutenant, would you be so good as to go down and disperse that crowd? Then we can cut our friend loose and take him back with us." Jezal looked at him blankly. Dead or alive, the king's warrant must be served. Yes, of course. The burly officer wiped sweat from his forehead and made, somewhat unsteadily, for the door. Glokta turned back to the window and peered down at the slowly swinging corpse. Magister Colt's last words echoed in his mind. Look in the closed council. Look in the House of Questions. Look in the university. Look in the banks. Glokta, Chapter 6. 3 signs. West crashed onto his arse, one of his steels skittering out of his hands and across the cobbles. "That's a touch!" shouted Marshal Varus. "A definite touch. Well fought, Jezal, well fought." West was starting to tire of losing. He was stronger than Jezal and taller with a better reach, but the cocky little bastard was quick. Damn quick and getting quicker. He knew all of West's tricks now, more or less, and if he kept improving at this rate he'd soon be beating him every time. Jezal knew it too. He had a smile of infuriating smugness on his face as he offered his hand to West and helped him up from the ground. "We're getting somewhere now." Varus slapped his stick against his leg in delight. "We may even have ourselves a champion, eh, Major?" "Very likely, sir," said West, rubbing at his elbow, bruised and throbbing from his fall. He looked sidelong at Jezal, basking in the warmth of the marshal's praise. "But we must not grow complacent." "No, sir," said Jezal emphatically. "No, indeed," said Varus. "Major West is a capable fencer, of course, and you are privileged to have him as a partner, but, well, and he grinned at West. "Fencing is a young man's game, eh, Major?" "Of course it is, sir," muttered West. "A young man's game. Bremer Dan Gorst, I expect, will be a different sort of opponent, as will the others at this year's contest. Less of the veteran's cunning, perhaps, but more of the vigor of youth, eh, West?" West, at 30, was still feeling somewhat vigorous, but there was no purpose in arguing. He knew he'd never been the most gifted swordsman in the world. "We have made great progress this past month. Great progress. You have a chance if you can maintain your focus. A definite chance. Well done. I will see you both tomorrow." And the old marshal strutted from the sunny courtyard. West walked over to his fumbled steel, lying on the cobbles by the wall. His side was still aching from the fall, and he had to bend awkwardly to get it. "I have to be going myself," he grunted as he straightened up, trying to hide his discomfort as best he could. "Important business? Marshal Burr has asked to see me? Is it to be war then, perhaps? I don't know." West looked Jezal up and down. He was avoiding West's eye for some reason. "And you? What have you got in mind for today?" Jezal fiddled with his steels. Nothing planned." "Not really?" He glanced up furtively. For such a good card player, the man was a useless liar. West felt a niggling of worry. "RD wouldn't be involved in your lack of plans, would she?" The niggling became a cold throbbing. "Well, maybe," snapped Jezal. "Well, Yes. West stepped right up to the younger man. Jezal. He heard himself saying slowly through gritted teeth. I hope you're not planning to fuck my sister. Now look here, the throbbing boiled over. West's hands gripped hold of Jezal by his shoulders. No, you look, he snarled. I'll not have her trifled with, you understand? She's been hurt before, and I'll not see her hurt any more. Not by you, not by anyone. I won't stand for it. She's not one of your games, you hear me? All right, said Jezal, face suddenly pale. Pale? All right. I've no designs on her. We're just friends is all. I like her. She doesn't know anyone here and you can trust me. There's no harm in it. Ah, get off me! West realized he was squeezing Jezal's arms with all his strength. How had that happened? He'd only meant to have a quiet word, and now he'd gone way too far. Hurt before. Damn it, he should never have said that. He let go suddenly, drew back, swallowing his fury. I don't want you seeing her anymore. Do you hear me? Now hold on, West. Who are you? To West's anger began to pulse again. Jezal, he growled. I'm your friend, so I'm asking you. He stepped forward again, closer than ever. And I'm her brother, so I'm warning you. Stay away. No good can come of it. Jezal shrank back against the wall. All right. She's your sister. West turned and stalked towards the archway, rubbing the back of his neck, his head thumping. Lord Marshal Burr was sitting and staring out of the window when West arrived at his offices. A big, grim, beefy man with a thick brown beard and a simple uniform. West wondered how bad the news would be. If the Marshal's face was anything to go by, it was very bad indeed. Major West, he said, glaring up from under his heavy brows. Thank you for coming. Of course, sir. West noticed 3 roughly made wooden boxes on a table by the wall. Burr saw him looking at them. Gifts, he said sourly. From our friend in the north, B thawed. Gifts? For the king, it seems. The Marshal scowled and sucked at his teeth. Why don't you have a look at what he sent us, Major? West walked over to the table, reached out and cautiously opened the lid of one of the boxes. An unpleasant smell flowed out, like well-rotted meat. But there was nothing inside but some brown dirt. He opened the next box. The smell was worse. More brown dirt, caked around the inside, and some hair, some strands of yellow hair. West swallowed, looked up at the frowning Lord Marshal. Is this all, sir? Burr snorted. If only. The rest we had to bury. The Marshal picked up a sheet of paper from his desk. Captain Silber, Captain Hoss, Colonel Ehrenhorn. Those names mean anything to you. West felt sick. That smell. It reminded him of Gurkhul somehow. Of the battlefield. Colonel Ehrenhorn. I know, he mumbled, staring at the 3 boxes. By reputation. He's commander of the garrison at Dunbreck. Was, corrected Burr. And the other 2 commanded small outposts nearby on the frontier. The frontier? Mumbled West. But he already guessed what was coming. Their heads, Major. The Northmen sent us their heads. West swallowed, looking at the yellow hairs stuck to the inside of the box. 3 signs, they said, when it was time. Burr got up from his chair and stood, looking out of the window. The outposts were nothing. Wooden buildings mostly, a palisade wall, ditches, and so on. Lightly manned, little strategic importance. Dunbreck is another matter. It commands the fords on the White Flow, said West numbly. The best way out of England, or in. A vital point. Considerable time and resources were spent on the defenses there. The very latest designs were used, our finest architects. A garrison of 300 men, with stores of weapons and food, to stand a year of siege. It was considered impregnable, the linchpin of our plans for the defense of the frontier. Burr frowned, deep grooves appearing across the bridge of his nose. Gone. West's head had started hurting again. When, sir? When is the question? It must have been at least 2 weeks ago for these gifts to have reached us. I am being called defeatist, said Burr sourly. But I guess that the Northmen are loose, and that by now they have overrun half of northern England. A mining community or 2, several penal colonies. Nothing so far of major importance. No towns to speak of. But they are coming, west, and fast. You may be sure of that. You don't send heads to your enemy, then wait politely for a reply. What is being done? Precious little. England is in uproar, of course. Lord Governor Meade is raising every man, determined to march out and beat Bethet on his own. The idiot. Varying reports place the Northmen anywhere and everywhere, with 1,000 men or 100,000. The ports are choked with civilians desperate to escape. Rumors are rife of spies and murderers loose in the country, and mobs seek out citizens with northern blood and beat them, rob them, or worse. Put simply, it is chaos. Meanwhile, we sit here on our fat arses, waiting. But weren't we warned? Didn't we know? Of course. Burr threw his broad hand up in the air. But no one took it very seriously, would you believe? Damn painted savage stabs himself on the floor of the open council, challenges us before the king, and nothing is done. Government by committee, everyone pulling their own way. You can only react, never prepare. The marshal coughed and burped, spat on the floor. Gah! Damn it! Damn indigestion. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his stomach unhappily. West hardly knew what to say. How do we proceed? He mumbled. We've been ordered north immediately, meaning as soon as anyone can be bothered to supply me with men and arms. The king, meaning the drunkard Hoff, has commanded me to bring these Northmen to heel. 12 regiments of the king's own, 7 of foot and 5 of horse, to be fleshed out with levies from the aristocracy. And whatever the Englanders haven't squandered before we get there. West shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That should be an overwhelming force. Huh, grunted the marshal. It better be. It's everything we have, more or less, and that worries me. West frowned. Dagoska, Major. We cannot fight the Gurkish and the Northmen both at once. But surely, sir, the Gurkish, they wouldn't risk another war so soon. I thought it was all idle talk. I hope so, I hope so. Burr pushed some papers absently around his desk. But this new Emperor Uthman is not what we were expecting. He was the youngest son, but when he heard of his father's death, he had all his brothers strangled. Strangled them himself, some say. Uthman ul-Dosht, they are calling him. Uthman the Merciless. He has already declared his intention to recapture Dagoska. Empty talk, perhaps. Perhaps not. Burr pursed his lips. They say he has spies everywhere. He might even now be learning of our troubles in England. Might even now be preparing to take advantage of our weakness. We must be done quickly with these Northmen. Very quickly. 12 regiments and levies from the noblemen. And from that point of view, it could not be a worse time. Sir, this business with the Mercers. A bad business. Some of the big noblemen got stung. Brockisher, Barazan, and others. Now they're dragging their feet with the levies. Who knows what they'll send us or when? Bunch of half-starved, unarmed beggars, probably. An excuse to clean the scrapings from their land. A useless crowd of extra mouths to feed and clothe and arm, and we are desperately short of good officers. I have some good men in my battalion. Burr twitched impatiently. Good men, yes. Honest men. Enthusiastic men. But not experienced. Most of those who fought in the South did not enjoy it. They have left the army and have no intention of returning. Have you seen how young the officers are these days? We're a damn finishing school. And now His Highness the Prince has expressed his interest in a command. He doesn't even know which end of a sword to hold, but he is set on glory, and I cannot refuse him. Prince Renault. If only, shouted Burr. Renault might actually be of some use. It's Ladislas I'm talking of. Commanding a division. A man who spends 1,000 marks a month on clothes. His lack of discipline is notorious. I've heard it said that he's forced himself on more than one servant in the palace, but that the Archlector was able to silence the girls. Surely not, said West, although he had actually heard such a rumor himself. The heir to the throne, in harm's way when the king is in poor health. A ludicrous notion. Burr got up, burping and wincing. Damn this stomach. He stalked over to the window and frowned out across the agrient. They think it will be easily settled, he said quietly. The closed council. A little jaunt in England, done with before the first snowfalls. In spite of this shock with Dunbreck, they never learn. They said the same about our war with the Gurkish, and that nearly finished us. These Northmen are not the primitives they think. I fought with northern mercenaries in Sterikland. Hard men used to hard lives, raised on warfare, fearless and stubborn. expert at fighting in the hills, in the forests, in the cold. They do not follow our rules, or even understand them. They will bring a violence and a savagery to the battlefield that would make the Gurkish blush. Burr turned away from the window, back to West. You were born in England, weren't you, Major? Yes, sir. In the south, near Austenholme. My family's farm was there. Before my father died, he trailed off. You were raised there? Yes, you know the land then. West frowned. In that region, sir, but I have not been back for. Do you know these Northmen? Some? There are still many living in England. You speak their tongue? Yes, a little, but they speak many. Good. I am putting together a staff. Good men I can rely on to carry out my orders, and see to it that this army of ours does not fall apart before it even comes into contact with the enemy. Of course, sir. West racked his brains. Of course, sir. West racked his brain. Captain Luthar is a capable and intelligent officer. Lieutenant Jezal. Ah, shouted Burr, waving his hand in frustration. I know Luthar. The boy's a cretin. Just the sort of bright-eyed child that I was talking about. It's you I need, West. Me? Yes, you. Marshal Varus, the Union's most famous soldier no less, has given you a glowing report. He says you are a most committed, tenacious, and hard-working officer, the very qualities I need. As a lieutenant you fought in Gurkul under Colonel Glokta, did you not? West swallowed. Well, yes, and it is well known you were first through the breach at Ulriach. Well, among the first I was. You have led men in the field, and your personal courage is beyond question. There is no need to be modest, Major. You are the man for me. Burr sat back, a smile on his face, confident he had made his point. He burped again, holding up his hand. My apologies. Damn indigestion. Sire, may I be blunt? I'm no courtier, West. You must always be blunt with me. I demand it. An appointment on a Lord Marshal's staff, sir, you must understand. I am a gentleman's son, a commoner. As commander of a battalion, I already have difficulty gaining the respect of the junior officers. The men I would have to give orders to if I were on your staff, sir. Senior men with good blood. He paused, exasperated. The Marshal gazed blankly at him. They will not permit it. Burr's eyebrows drew together. Permit it? Their pride will not allow it, sir. Damn their pride. Burr leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on West's face. Now listen to me, and listen carefully. Times are changing. I don't need men with good blood. I need men who can plan and organize, give orders, and follow them. There will be no room in my army for those who cannot do as they are told. I don't care how noble they are. As a member of my staff, you represent me, and I will not be slighted or ignored. He burped suddenly and smashed the table with his fist. I will see to it. He roared. Times are changing. They may not smell it yet, but they soon will. West stared dumbly back. In any case, and Burr waved a dismissive hand, I am not consulting with you. I am informing you. This is your new assignment. Your king needs you, your country needs you, and that is all. You have 5 days to hand over command of your battalion. And the Lord Marshal turned back to his papers. Yes, sir, muttered West. He fumbled the door shut behind him with numb fingers, walked slowly down the hallway, staring at the floor. War in the north, Dunbrek fallen. The Northmen loose in England. Officers hurried around him. Someone brushed past, but he hardly noticed. There were people in danger, mortal danger. People he knew, maybe. Neighbors from home. There was fighting even now inside the Union's borders. He rubbed his jaw. This war could be a terrible thing, worse than Gurkul had been even, and he would be at the heart of it. A place on a Lord Marshal's staff. Him? Colum West? A commoner? He still could hardly believe it. West felt a sneaking, guilty glow of satisfaction. It was for just such an appointment that he had been working like a dog all these years. If he did well, there was no telling where he might go. This war was a bad thing, a terrible thing, no doubt. He felt himself grinning. A terrible thing. But it just might be the making of him. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.